Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. Welcome to TechStrong TV for today, Tuesday, July 14th. We're here. Better than not being here, I guess. Well, for many of us, we are in a bit of, well, for us here in Florida anyway, it's a bit of a scary time. We've had some insane numbers of people come down sick, hospitals filling up across several states in the U.S., and it's not an easy time. But it's also a time where we need to keep focused on what we do at work, what we're doing, how technology is enabling many of us to continue to function in what's happening. And that's what we do here at TechStrong TV, right? We talk about what's going on in the world of tech, try to leave the bad news and all of that other stuff out there for now. We've got a good show for us today. I've got a bunch of great interviews. Mitchell has some really good stuff, as well as Charlene. Let me jump in and tell you what we have in store. Our first interview today features a friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of knowing now for a number of years. He's Will Herman. Will is a very, very successful serial entrepreneur, angel investor, board member, really just a real asset to the whole startup ecosystem. He's been involved in Techstars, a bunch of other things. Will and another very good friend of mine, Raj Bhargavar, co-authored a book, I guess it was about a little over a year ago, called the Startup Playbook. And it was an Amazon bestseller for a bit. And they've just come out with version 2 of the playbook, which has been updated with some additional information, and is also now published in conjunction with the folks at Techstars, where the book will be a featured reference within the Techstars library worldwide for entrepreneurs and startup teams. So we're going to talk to Will about what's in version 2 and what's happening in the world of startups. After that, big news last week was that SUSE had acquired Rancher Labs. Of course, Rancher Labs, Rancher OS, was a big player in the Kubernetes space. Their CEO, Shang Lang, was on several of the OTC boards at CNCF. They donated, I think, several open source projects to CNCF. They're a player in the Kubernetes space, no doubt about it, and have been in the space, in the cloud native space, since their inception. Well, SUSE has purchased them, and I just cement SUSE's intention to become a player in the open source cloud native Kubernetes space. We caught up with my friend Shang Lang and asked him why SUSE, why now, and what we can expect to see going forward. And Shang shares that with us. After our interview with Shang Lang, another old friend of mine, Hayden Lindsay. Hayden is, of course, with Broadcom now, where he heads up a lot of the developer tools, software, and for mainframe, in their mainframe division. Hayden's been a fixture and leader in mainframe and mainframe software now for many years. At Broadcom CA before the Broadcom acquisition, IBM before that. And he's someone who really understands what the mission is, how people are using mainframes now in a hybrid environment with both mobile and cloud infrastructure. And we're going to have a good chat with Hayden. Check that one out. Then we're going to go back to something old, and we have something out of, again, TechStrong Con. Matt Rose. Matt, of course, a longtime evangelist with check marks. And this is Matt's presentation from TechStrong Con. It's called Putting the Sec in DevOps. And it's a good sort of toward the force for DevSecOps. So I think you'll like what Matt has there. After that, I'll be back with the news, as usual, headlines from around our sites. And then over to Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene has a good interview today with Aisha Mazumadar of Optimizely, as well as a preview of the rest of the week's webinars here on Media Ops. You want to check those out. And then I'll be back to introduce a really special analyst corner that Mitchell has this week. this week Mitchell has both a commentary and then a great panel that was actually chaired by Evelyn Orlick, a member of Accelerated Strategies Group as well as DevOps Institute. And Mitchell is on the panel. He'll tell you all about it. We'll get into that. And then I'll be back to wrap things up at the end of the show. So it sounds like it's going to be a fantastic Tuesday of content here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a quick break right now with a commercial from our sponsor and be back with our first guest.
Join top experts and peers for a Splunk virtual event, DevOps Open Source Insights and Innovations. Open source powers the world, drives innovation in technology and in practice, and reduces the proliferation of products that just don't work together. In the arena of DevOps, open source tools and standards enable problems to get solved. Come take a look at some of the ways Splunk solves problems with open source and how we are contributing to open source solutions to make your work life better. Register today.
So as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've known Will Herman now for a number of years. Will has an amazing track record of serial entrepreneurship with some very successful exits. But then Will parlayed that, and he's also done, I want to say it's over 80 angel investments. He's sat on 24 or more boards, I bet, and involved in Techstars, a bunch of other things. Will is someone who really has his pulse on the entrepreneur, founders kind of world and communities. Him and another really good friend of mine, Rajat Bhargava, wrote the Startup Playbook. It was an Amazon bestseller. They've now released version 2, and it's done in conjunction with the folks at Techstars. And it's actually going into, it's some sort of, I guess it's a Techstars reference library for startups. And Will and Raj have added some additional content to version 2 to make it worth your while. Here's my conversation with Will, all about what's new in version 2 and what does he see happening.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this segment on TechStrong TV. I'm joined by a friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years now, Will Herman. Will is a serial entrepreneur extraordinaire, board member, angel investor, as well as an author. And Will's going to talk to us today about version 2 of the Startup Playbook, which has recently just been published. Hey, Will, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure. So, Will, I didn't want to embarrass you in the opening, but just to give our audience a little flavor, tell them who Will Herman is.
Sure. So as you said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started 5 companies, 3 of them pretty big successes, 2 went public, 3 sold, and 2 were miserable failures, crash and burn, cry, go home to mama kind of failures. My best, most solid learning experiences. I sold my last company a while ago, and since then I've been an active angel investor. I've invested in over 80 companies, advised a couple of hundred more, sat on about 25 boards, and I have a blast just being part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Excellent. And I should also mention, I know Will. Well, I originally met Will when I was still at Still Secure, a company I helped co-found with my friend Rajat Bhargava, who's actually Will's co-author on the Startup Playbook. And then, Will was part of the whole Raj Bradfeld at Foundry Group and Techstars. And, of course, Techstars, Will, I know you were early on Techstars up in Boston. And, that whole startup community ecosystem, if you will, of which Will's been a player in and one of the leaders of. So, Will, you and Raj wrote the Startup Playbook. What was it, about a year and a half now, or was it 2 years ago?
Almost 2 years ago.
Yep. And tell us why. What kind of, after all you've accomplished, what prompted you to say, hey, I want to write a book?
Yeah, well, probably if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have bothered.
Probably.
I mean, just because it's so much work. That aside, oh, and by the way, just to do with TechStars, TechStars is actually the partner in publishing the second edition of the book. We've got.
Oh, I didn't realize. Fantastic.
So yeah, they plan on using it as part of accelerator programs and so forth. So we wrote the first edition of the book about 2 years ago because we, in working with a lot of companies, we found that so many of them were making the same mistakes over and over again, and entrepreneurs were out looking for advice, but what they were finding is they couldn't find advice from people who were other founders. Other founders are off doing their own entrepreneurial thing. They don't have time to write a book. So all of the advice out there is really from people who have something to gain. They're venture capitalists, they're attorneys, or they're academicians, which we are clearly not academicians, who are happy to talk about statistics, but really have never done it before.
Right.
And so we wanted to create a book that was founder to founder. We're going to tell you our stories. We're going to tell you where we screwed up. We're going to tell you where things we think, are the right things to do. And, but we're only going to tell you that from the position of being on the same side of the table as you. And we looked out for books like that, and there was really nothing. I mean, really nothing out there. There's plenty of books to help founders, but we wanted to help the first time founder, the first time entrepreneur, and give them just the brass tacks of how to avoid problems and sort of shift the odds of success in their favor.
Absolutely. And, two things. First of all, on the odds of success, let's be realistic. Something like, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but something like 80% of all startups actually fail within, I think it's 3 years.
Yeah, it's actually 90.
90%? Okay, I was being generous.
Yeah. But it's a large number.
Yeah. But, of course, the flip side to that, Will, is, as you said right in the beginning, you learn more from your failures and than you do from your successes oftentimes. And a lot of, I've listened to a lot of successful people who say that. And so, for those of you watching out there, look, you fail. Like you said, you want to go run home and cry to mama, fine. But you get up, you dust off your pants, and you take your lessons, you learn your lessons, and you move on to your next adventure. Will, you're living proof of it. I'm living. I mean, look, I'm living proof of it, right? I've been through a bunch of them. So, I think that's number one. Number two, Will, this is an interesting thing I have found with our media ops audience. We have basically a technical audience. A lot of really smart developers, ops folks, technical, from the technical side of the house. And all of them, excuse me, all of them see things and say, man, if we can make a tool that did this, or I had a service that helped people with that, there's a real need for it. They see the need because they live it, right? But so what's stopping you? Right? What's stopping you from going out and taking that idea? I always tell people, I've never met an entrepreneur who was successful that didn't think in some small way what they were doing was changing the world. Right? If you're an entrepreneur who has a product that's a nice to have, don't waste your time. But if you think you've got an idea for something that truly is in some small way going to change, or some big way going to change the world, what stopped you from doing it? And your book is you're right, is one of the few books I've seen that is for that person.
Right?
Yeah. Yep. We even go a step further, I think, and the first part of the book is really asking the reader, are you cut out to be an entrepreneur? And this is what being an entrepreneur really means. We all get caught up in the Hollywood version of entrepreneurship, right? First of all, that there are such things as overnight successes, which there never are. The average success takes at least a decade. And there's very little that lays out the real pragmatic view of What are you going to sacrifice? How long is it going to take? What are the characteristics you need? And, what's the effort you're going to have to put in? And I think it's really important because, like you said, I mean, a lot of people who are would-be entrepreneurs don't get off the stick because they're afraid. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of what they don't know. So we want to expose what it's really like. So they know, it becomes a known, and they know what to take on and what they need to do. But it also says to people that maybe you're not cut out for it, or maybe it's not a lifestyle that you want, because as you know, Alan, it's a hard lifestyle. It's a dedicated, time-consuming. Yeah, it's a big deal. So we lay that all out, and what we hope is that there are some people who say, it's not for me. And by the way, I'm probably going to make more money going to work for large company XYZ and have a much better, work-life balance. But it also says to the people who are truly entrepreneurial, it's like, here's a, kick in the butt. I know now what I have to take on. This is the path I'm going to go.
And you know what? I don't think it's healthy to have fear. It's funny, we do our all hands every year around January here. We bring everyone down to Boca and have a week of really planning, but also a week of social and team building stuff. And in my presentation this year, talking about, we're doing this now 6 years, and I told my team, I go to bed every night, Will, scared to death. Scared that we're going to lose one of our biggest customers, or we're not going to be able to deliver what we've promised, or that there's going to be a drastic change in the market, or some technology that we didn't see that blindsides us, or some well-funded competitor decides that, hey, we got to. There's a million and one reasons why I'm scared to death every night when I go to bed. But you know what? When I wake up, I'm still so damn excited every morning to run into my office and start tackling the world of things I got in front of me. And I don't know when the transition happens, at 3 a.m, 4 a.m, whatever, where that fear turns into, I can't wait to get out there and do it. But it's what keeps me going every single day. And I think that I'm not alone. I think that's probably a common, entrepreneurial mindset. You need a healthy dose of scared.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. But to your point, right, knowing that that's a thing, right? There's so many. It's so lonely at times for founders, for entrepreneurs, that it's good to have somebody, we believe it's good to have somebody tell them that that's how it is and that's okay. It's okay not to be able to sleep at night and then to be so pumped in the morning you don't need any caffeine. That's normal. That's what it takes.
It is. So you and Raj wrote this book. The edition 1 was not TechStar's published. It was just you and Raj. And I remember, I'm pretty sure we interviewed. We were probably doing podcasts then, more than video like this. But we did an interview. The book, for a while, was like zooming up the Amazon bestseller lists for business and stuff. It did very well. What prompted version 2?
That's a really good question. One was TechStars came to us and said, gee, we think we like your ideas here. We can leverage some of them in the accelerator program. That was a little. We had one of the things that came out of the first edition that was so attractive. By the way, to your point, we were an Amazon bestseller as a startup book, and we sold out of our first printing. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got was, wow, the nicest thing is this is super easy to read. It's people weren't, like I said, academicians and VCs write most of the books, and they were blocky, factual, chart process, data, all this abstract stuff, which we have in the book too, but we present it from our point of view. And we said, okay, what we need to do is actually go along with that, punch it up more. And so we've added dozens of more stories to the book to make it even, more accessible to a wider range of people. We've updated some of the facts and figures because things have changed in the last couple of years. You know how dynamic the market is. And we've actually broken it up a little bit. So structurally, it's quite a bit different than the first edition.
Really?
But easier to read, more stories, more adaptable to a larger group of people. That was the main goal.
Yeah, that was so. The TechStars connection here, they're going to use it as sort of library reference in their accelerator programs around the world.
Yeah, so they've got a series of books now. So they've put together, as you know, Brad Feld has produced a few books, and a few other CEOs in their network have put together books. And so they have a series now working with Wiley, who is the actual publisher in the back end. That they will basically promote the series of books to all of the companies that join their accelerator programs. Here's a set of books. This is what each one's for. Plop. Here you go. This is the reading material for the accelerator program.
Excellent stuff. So I feel like I got to ask it because it's the elephant in the room for all of our conversations recently. What effect do you think this whole COVID situation is having on the startup community, on entrepreneurs, we're still seeing money being raised. Certainly, excuse me, I don't think at the levels we saw probably pre-COVID perhaps, but we're still seeing a lot of investment, a lot of VC and private equity money flowing in. What effect do you think it's had, Will?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there is a lot of investment in private equity money going in, but it's really B rounds and later. So I think the total dollars going into the market now, and I don't have the latest quarterly numbers, but the total dollars going into the market is probably equal to what it was last year or the year before. But like I said, going into later rounds, it's much harder to close a seed round now, or what they refer to as a pre-seed round, which is the early money into a company. Oh, excuse me. The primary problem there is that angel investors and microcap VCs who are the basis for the market for pre-seed and seed investment are like face-to-face communication. And they're having trouble making calls on deals without actually meeting directly with the founders.
Makes sense. I mean, we've had a few interviews with CEOs of companies that have made acquisitions, without ever having met
Very strange.
the founding. I just can't imagine it. It's like. I just, and we're not talking about $1 million or $3 million. We're talking about, tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds. When some of it may, of course, be equity, but what does that mean? And it's just, I don't know. On the other hand, we've hired people here that I still haven't met in person.
Yeah, that's also very strange. I think that's the new real, though. It won't be this bad, obviously, but I think we're going to all get more comfortable. I mean, I know a lot of startups now many of them that I work with, who basically said, you know what, real estate, just not interesting to me. And what that did was it frees up the founders to saying, like, do I really care where my
people are? That's a whole different, I mean, look, this frankly was something Raja and I used to go back and forth with. It still secure for 100 years, right? Because back then getting people in Boulder was not as easy. It's still not easy getting people in Boulder, more competitive. But you start questioning why do I need an office? And what difference does it make? I want to go where talent is. The flip side to that is talent now doesn't have to say, oh my God, I got to find a job for $400,000 a year because I got to be in San Francisco to get this kind of job. And so I can move to Idaho or Texas or Colorado or wherever, and you know what, work for a lot less money. And from the entrepreneur's point of view, it's still true too, right? I know we always felt, not being in the Valley, there was definitely a bias against us raising money, right? At valuations that you would get had we been a Silicon Valley company. And why, right? Now I think someone's ripped the clothes off the emperor, and people are going to start asking why.
Yeah, I think, so I'm an old organizational behavior kind of guy. Old school organizational kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm actually an old
I was going to let you run, Will.
and I still believe we haven't really figured out the impact of the lack of, water cooler conversation or, cappuccino machine conversation. We haven't figured out what the balance is. I think there's a cost to doing business completely remotely. I have no idea what the answer is, but we'll see. On the venture thing, I think you're right. I think venture will open up. It'll be more remote. Still, I think a lot of VCs, especially the early guys and the fun guys, fun people, will want to meet people face to face. And there's always an aura about Silicon Valley that's not going to go away. No. So, there's going to be a preference there. But to your point, things will open up in a lot of ways, on a lot of vectors.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you offline about that one. But, Will, we're almost out of time. I got one more area I want to jump on with you. And we did it just so everyone out here knows, I didn't really sit down with Will and map this out. I said, Will, we're going to talk for a while. And he said, that's great with me. So, Will, for potential entrepreneurs watching this right now, what advice do you give them in light of what we just discussed around this whole COVID thing and remote and not in person? Should they go full speed ahead? Should they maybe kind of, I never advise people to curl up in a fetal position. So that's not my advice, right? But how aggressive should they be raising funds? Should they be doing things to advance their plans short of raising funds or instead of raising funds? Or what advice do you give them right now?
Yeah, isn't that the core question? So we believe that first of all, I'm with you. I'm a pedal to the metal kind of guy. Just go, but I think you can go differently. Now, you don't go full bore at raising money. What you go full bore at is trying to find the smallest, tightest team you can to get to product market fit. And for those who don't know what product market fit is, that's where you've actually tested your product or service in the market to the point where you've got a reasonable set of customers who will commit, not do it, but commit to buying at a price you need to sell at. So when you get to that point, you've created the product or service and there's a real need there and you've got a business to build on. When you've created that and you have some real data around who was going to acquire there, then you can go out for money. And then you can establish that you've got a real business model that's going to work, that you're going to go forward. We have this thing in this book, we call it the vetting loop, that walks everybody through exactly the process they need to do. When you do it that way, you can actually burn less money up front, smaller, tighter team, more highly leveraged. And then when you come through this gate, which is product market fit, then you can actually get a better valuation. You can raise more money. You're much more highly visible and your business gets going much faster. So you spend more time up front, needing less money, but you grow faster in the back end. I think that's the way you got to do it now.
Makes sense to me. Hey, Will, one last thing. People can get the book on Amazon, I assume?
At Amazon, absolutely. You can check it out at our website, startup-playbook.com. It's also available directly from the Wiley site at Barnes & Noble, at IndieBound, at Books A Million. When you work with a big publisher like Wiley, it's sort of available everywhere, but you can certainly find it on Amazon. That's the place most people go for books.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on the second edition of the Startup Playbook. Great work, man. Keep it up. I will be in touch. Let's hope there's football season this year and we can talk football. But if not, we'll talk startups and entrepreneurs.
It's always something to fall back on. Thanks a lot, Alan. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. All right. Will Herman, author of Startup Playbook. It's in version 2. It's available at Amazon and all the places you'd usually find a book. It's a great book. I read version 1. I haven't looked at version 2 yet, but I will. Check it out. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest on TechStrong TV. You know, SUSE has been wanting to be a player in the Kubernetes cloud native space for a long time now. They are one of the largest open source companies in the world. And with this last week's announcement of their intent to acquire Rancher Labs, you have to take them seriously as a real player now in the Kubernetes space and cloud native. Along with the Rancher Labs company, Sheng Liang, the CEO and founder of Rancher, is joining SUSE, and they've designed a great role for Sheng going forward that he's very excited about. Will allow him to continue his work with the CNCF and some of the other organizations he's involved in, as well as continuing bringing open source software to those who need it to create great applications. So here's my conversation with Sheng Liang, a CEO founder of Rancher Labs, about their acquisition by SUSE.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here at TechStrong TV. I am really happy to be joined by kind of the man of the hour, my friend Sheng Liang. Sheng is the founder, CEO of Rancher Labs. First of all, Sheng, welcome to TechStrong TV again, and congratulations on Rancher's acquisition by SUSE.
Thank you, Alan. I'm glad to be here.
It's my pleasure to have. It's always a pleasure to have you, my friend. So, Sheng, the news came out last week. The announcement, the official announcement. SUSE, I'm not sure if SUSE is a public company or it's owned by a private equity group.
It's a private company. It's a very big private equity company, very profitable private company, but it's a private company.
Yep, but they have gotten all of their approvals and so forth, and to make the announcement, and they announced the intent to acquire Rancher. So, number one, congratulations are in order to you. And Sheng, of course, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for years now. I know this isn't the first time you've started a company and been lucky enough or skilled enough or both to see it through to an acquisition or a sale and a liquidity event. But our audience probably is not as familiar. Why don't give them a little bit of your history, Sheng? You're a serial entrepreneur in every sense of the word. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it actually relates to what we do at Rancher too. Back in 2008, I started a company called Cloud.com, and we back then, EC2 was just getting started, so we were one of the early movers in helping enterprises build private clouds and help service providers that build public cloud actually competed with AWS. We're very successful in doing that, and we were acquired by Citrix just 2.5 years later after we started. So we were acquired in 2011, and I stayed on as a CTO of cloud platforms at Citrix for 3 years, and then after that I started Rancher in 2014, and it's been just been a wonderful journey. Last 6 years, grow with Kubernetes, grow with the community, and now it's the next stage of Rancher's growth with SUSE.
Sure, I mean, and even look, Sheng, I met you originally at Cloud.com, as you know, before the acquisition by Citrix. And then through the Citrix years, we stayed in touch. And then with Rancher, I mean, look, what a journey it's been with Rancher. As you mentioned, 6 years. Originally, you know, this was kind of pre-Kubernetes, or at least before dominant Kubernetes. And Rancher and Rancher OS were a really kind of almost a potential rival to Kubernetes or a contender. But again, a smart entrepreneur saw the currents in the ocean here and pivoted a little bit to embrace Kubernetes. I was being kind. Okay. But yes, a big pivot to say, okay, if you can't beat them, join them. Right. And made Kubernetes, you know, part of the organic, if you will, Rancher distribution, and built it from there. And not only that pivot, Sheng, but also embracing the whole open source, the whole CNCF, you know, community and being involved in it. I mean, it really was. I mean, it's quite a story, and kudos to you for you know, being able to pull this off in just 6 short years.
Thank you. I mean, it is really rewarding. The you know, the pivot was a large pivot. It's not. I mean, we always loved Kubernetes. The problem was Kubernetes wasn't ready. Kubernetes was actually there even when we started Rancher. But, you know, it's just fair to say anyone take one look at it, it's not ready for prime time, right? So really the moral of the story is you always follow the customer demand. So at the time, Docker is extremely mature, but Docker and is extremely popular, but they just don't have an orchestration system. So what we had to do was we had to create an orchestration system ourselves called Cattle, you know, Cattle Rancher, yes, or part of the Rancher naming scheme. But we always I refuse to ship even our 1.0 product without some support for Kubernetes. So you know, we really didn't want to fight Kubernetes, but because Cattle was gaining quite a bit of traction early on, so you kind of de facto a competitor to Kubernetes. But then I think we made a really rough pivot, you know, a couple of years later, actually in 2018, when we shipped 2.0. And I'm glad we did it, because that's when our business really took off. You know, and you could also see if we hadn't done it, what might have happened. You know, you know, there's some contemporaries of us who I greatly respect. You know, early innovators, right? Companies like Docker, you know, Mesosphere, and they were like just years ahead of us in terms of innovation and even, you know, customer traction. But I think both to some degree became, I mean, we talked about it, but became somewhat, you know, as a victim of their
casualties,
success, right? And I think, you know, pivot is hard. And, you know, I think Rancher, as much as a lot of, just like a lot of other startups, is really a story of, you know, keeping up with market reality and pivot.
I agree with you. Sheng, I feel like it was probably less than a month ago. I had you here on TechStrong TV. We were talking. Is it Longhorn? Is the storage, the open source storage that Rancher had just released, and it was given to CNCF, right? Working with CNCF, and you know, it was obvious to me then that Rancher was now, you know, had completed that pivot that you started in 2018, that you were all in on Kubernetes, that you kind of, you know, saw the currents and navigated the ship. A month later, this acquisition is announced. So I'd like, if you don't mind, sharing, we won't tell anyone other than everyone watching this show. Would you mind sharing kind of, as the CEO, the founder, this is your company to a large degree, what was the thought process, you know, how did, without giving up anything, no kidding aside, without saying anything confidential, what motivated you? What made you say, okay, you know what, this is the right move at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the you know, since last week, I've been getting a lot of, you know, congratulatory messages, and a lot of people would say congratulate for a successful exit. But I mean, this is not really an exit. Exit means it's the end. You know, you kind of retire, right? And really, what's attractive about SUSE acquisition is, you know, I could not have found another company who aligns with us both in terms of innovation strategy and business strategy. You know, the fact that we want to innovate in the open. The whole thing is built around open and open source. And I always like to emphasize open and open source is actually not always the same. You know, open source is well accepted now, but you could build an open source company with, you know, fairly closed minded way, right? I would only support because open source is really all about support, but you could say I would only support this operating system, that technology stack, and, you know, anything. So SUSE had this saying which really resonated with me called the power of many. You know, a lot of people don't know. I mean, SUSE is a leading, obviously, enterprise Linux vendor, but they actually support a lot of even competitors, alternative Linux distros. You know, so like if you look at Rancher, like we always, just the way we approach Kubernetes, we don't have to be the only Kubernetes distro. We don't even claim we have the best Kubernetes distro across the board. You know, if you're on Amazon, like why would anyone like set up a Kubernetes cluster on Amazon using RKE or OpenShift, whatever? Like, what's the point? Because EKS is there, it's practically free, right? It's supported by Amazon because Amazon could afford to do it because they make money from infrastructure. So you just got to embrace whatever is available, and doesn't mean, you know, we can't add any value. We add a whole bunch of value on top of Kubernetes, and then we also add value in delivering and building Kubernetes clusters on the edge. You know very well the K3S innovation that we did. So I think what this kind of open, the power of many kind of mindset is what really drove us to innovate. So now we really have to find what customers' real problems are, where we can actually add value, as opposed to, you know, try to define our share in the whole value stack by some sort of artificial lock-in, right? So this SUSE, it turns out, has exactly the same mindset. I mean, that really resonated with us, and I think the combination, you know, it's very clear what we bring to SUSE is just a you know, our ability to innovate, especially in the CNCF ecosystem, to the whole different level. And what SUSE brings to Rancher is just its global reach, its you know, loyal, happy customer base, enterprise customer base, and I think it's a great combination.
Absolutely. But of course, you didn't have to do this, Sheng, right? I mean, Rancher is, you know, raising money, if that was the issue, not. Excitement in the industry, not an issue. What really made you say, you know what, now's the right time? I get that SUSE is the right company, but why is this the right time?
That's a great question. I've actually had a lot of debates with my co-founders, because the reality is we just raised a big round of funding, Series D, that was raised it was announced in March, but raised in February, so not that long ago. And that was like $40 million. But the reality, we haven't even spent the Series C money. It was $25 million raised 2 years ago. So we, as a company, we raised $95 million total. I've only spent like a third of it. So I still have quite a bit of dry powder, of about $60 million left. So it's not like, even with the COVID, I mean, I haven't seen a huge downturn of our business, because, I mean, we're very lucky.
You're in the right business.
We're extremely lucky, because most companies are continuing their digital transformation journey, right? And if at all, some of them even stepped it up. So I think we were very lucky to do that. But really, what ultimately motivated us was just this vision we were all working toward. You know, Kubernetes is actually going to be the next Linux. It's going to be the standard computing protocol, like TCP/IP was a standard networking protocol. And no matter where you're going to deploy your app, instead of having to worry about like the subtle differences between Azure and AWS and on-premise vSphere, bare metal, or you have Raspberry Pi running on the edge, Kubernetes with Rancher, we make them all the same. And this market is here now. And it's not just us realizing it. If you look at the industry, what's going on in the last last year or two, you see like IBM jump into it really, like with Red Hat acquisition. You see VMware; those are great leaders in the industry, right? And VMware essentially folding back for bringing Pivotal back in the fold. So everyone sees the same opportunity, and I really believe the next couple of years is going to be crucial. So we could obviously do it by ourselves in a more capital efficient way, and we'll probably have a larger slice of a smaller pie in the end, or we could join forces with SUSE and actually be the platform of choice. There are areas clearly Rancher was deficient, not in product, but just enterprise credibility. Most Rancher deals were landed based on developer love, DevOps love. So we're like very, very bottom up. That stuff works. I mean, worked out very well for us. Like I think 80-90% of our deals actually come out of an inbound lead, at a departmental level.
It's the democratization of IT. It's the new way. It's the DevRel versus sales.
But it takes time, right? It takes time, and now with basically organizations as a whole are all realizing the value of what we're doing, but we're not really known yet in the C-suite of IT, right? So that's why by combining with SUSE, who's already has the ear of CIOs and VP of infrastructure, VP of apps. I mean, I just think it's in the end, it's like 1 + 1 is going to be much greater than 2, and it's in the end it's going to work out better for everyone.
Sheng, to me, it also though signifies a little bit. Maybe it's the end of the age of innocence, to quote a song, right? That's from when I was much younger. There was a time where Kubernetes and this whole cloud native and CNCF and everything, it was pure, if you will, right? It was love, DevOps love, if you want to call it, right? People did it because it was exciting. It was pure. It was the thing. Everyone recognized the inherent possibility and power of it, but it was down here at the doer level, right? And now I think what this deal is a foretelling of is that we've moved beyond that age of innocence into an age of dominance, the age of, when you start seeing companies like IBM and SUSE and, VMware and Dell and, all of these kinds of Cisco, the Microsofts, when the big guys like that start recognizing that this is going to be crucial to their success, you could go big or go home. And even though $60 million may sound like a lot of money to you and I, when you're talking about competing against the likes of these companies and trying to fight for a place in the C-level boardroom or office space, you and I both know we've been there, right? That's a hard.
No, the scale matters. This is as the technology crosses over. I think it just about crossed the chasm, using that term, as it cross over from true early adopters to more mainstream adoption. Just the access to to an enterprise, to a global enterprise sales force. That's what SUSE has, right? We're still like Rancher, a small company as we are. We're 250 people, but we already stretched ourselves. Like we operate in 14 countries already. The challenge of that, right? Like there's only that much, but SUSE is pretty much in every country we operate, and 2, 3, 4 times more. Right?
More than that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, it's just the culture of the company, what Melissa, the SUSE CEO, was able to build. It's just marvelous. It is. I'm just so confident about this particular combination.
Good. We only have a minute or two left, Sheng, but I wanted to just quickly. So the deal is not officially closed yet, but what do you see your role going forward? You're on several boards and steering committees or whatever have you at the CNCF and other organizations?
Obviously, I'm going to continue to be involved just as vigorously in all the open source initiatives, including the CNCF TOC. What's particularly exciting for me is the role that SUSE has plotted out for me. It was part of the announcement. As part of the deal is because at Rancher, I was the product guy. I was the CEO, and I was lucky enough to just be able to focus on technology and product and engineering. And Shannon, my partner, pretty much got all the sales, and then later Peter joined, and he got all the marketing stuff taken care of. So at SUSE, I'm going to be I'm going to be the president of engineering and innovation. And what that means is I'm actually not only going to be continuing driving the engineering effort of Rancher, I'm actually going to be driving the engineering effort of all of SUSE. So basically, my team goes up, by order of magnitude, and I'm really excited. Just unlock the potential of innovation, the speed of innovation in such a grand scale. That's at the end of the day, as entrepreneurs, more than the money or control, I really want the technology we develop to actually make a difference for the industry, and then this is, for me, that's the most exciting part.
Excellent.
Well, Sheng, we're over time, Sheng. But I, first of all, again, congratulations to you, and not just to you, though you are a hands-on CEO, as you said, run product, but to all 250 people at Rancher. Job well done. But this is not the end. This is the beginning of the next chapter. We're looking forward to big things from you personally, as well as the Rancher and SUSE teams, as we continue, marching forward into this new era of compute, let's call it, right? And I hope you'll still be coming back to visit with us every couple of weeks.
Absolutely. I look forward to doing that after the deal closes and we, formulate the joint plan. We're starting to formulate the joint plan with SUSE and start executing on it.
Fantastic. My friend Sheng Liang, CEO of Rancher, now going on hopefully soon, part of SUSE. Here on TechStrong TV, this is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hayden Lindsay has been a fixture in the mainframe space now for many years. Hayden's specialty is really the kinds of products or empowering developers and DevOps teams to use mainframes to power, cutting edge applications and functionality. Hayden's a great evangelist for mainframes in general. He's been with CA Technologies and now Broadcom for a few years. I haven't had a chance to catch up with Hayden for some time, but we had a good chat about what are some of the latest tools he's helping develop there at Broadcom, or leading development of at Broadcom, that allow developers to use mainframes not just for traditional mainframe type applications, but for mobile to mainframe, hybrid cloud to mainframe, and more. here's my conversation with Hayden. I think you'll enjoy it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this episode of TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to be joined with someone joining us today, someone I've been trying to get on the show for a while. It's my friend Hayden Lindsay. Hayden is one of the most renowned people I know in the industry around the mainframe computing platform, and he's been a part of that landscape, if you will, for as long as I've been around and aware of the industry. I'm not going to put him on the spot and ask him how old he is, how long he's doing it, but take my word for it. It's been a while. Hayden, welcome to TechStrong TV. How are you?
Doing great, Alan. Glad to be with you again. We've had a little hiatus, but it's good to join you again.
Absolutely. So Hayden, why don't you, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw it back out at you. Can you give our audience a little, obviously you're at Broadcom now, but what's your title, responsibilities there? And
so I joined CA Technologies back in April of 2018, and then Broadcom announced the acquisition 3 months later. So then I've been a part of Broadcom since the acquisition closed for a bit over a year and a half. I am responsible for the engineering and architecture in the mainframe division for our entire product portfolio. We've got a number of labs around the world. So we build a lot of products, hopefully architect them well, try to use best practices, some of which we've talked about many times in the past, employing it internally as well as helping our clients employ those techniques as well, like DevOps and so forth.
There's no truth to the rumors that Broadcom bought CA just because you came on board there on the mainframe side.
I'm quite sure that did not factor into their decision.
But seriously, Hayden, you and I have talked mainframes for a while, and we've seen, mainframes have been around, I guess, about 40 or 50 years, perhaps, right?
Probably pushing 55 to 56 or 7, something like that. They had the 50th anniversary, some years ago.
I think I remember it. And but what we've seen, certainly, let's call it the last 6, 7, 8 years, we've really seen almost a rebirth of, what's old is new again. But the mainframe, the mainframe software, the mainframe apps that we don't really, many of us don't even take notice that they're running on a mainframe because they just are, right? Are not what we may think of as mainframe computing from 40 or 50 or 30 or 25 years ago. Modern architectures, modern applications, and now we're starting to see modern tool sets, right, being opened up to mainframe architecture, which is it's a game changer, and it's something I know you've championed over the years. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I do think it's been the mainframe has evolved like the Corvette has evolved, like the Mustang. If you knew how to drive one of those things back in the 60s, you know how to drive one now. It's just that the horsepower and the lateral G-force and all that, and braking is tremendously better. Yeah. And I think the mainframe is similar. They've continued to innovate the platform such that it's not just about, CPU speed or anything like that. It's about what it can do. And I think especially in the context of a hybrid environment versus thinking about the mainframe as an isolated machine that's siloed, separate from everything else. When you think about enterprise applications nowadays, they're traditionally multi-platform and multi-technology. And if the mainframe is in the mix, it needs to be incorporated and integrated. And so all the things that we have been doing in the distributed and then the mobile and cloud space need to equally apply and can equally apply to the mainframe. And so the nirvana is you have CI/CD pipelines or multi-platform monitoring or what have you, multi-platform security management that's goes across the enterprise, inclusive of the mainframe. And I think we're seeing the technology's been there and is evolving and being enhanced. And now clients are coming along more and more of late.
Sure. I think, like everything else in technology, someone once told me, very little in technology, Hayden, is truly revolutionary. It's evolutionary much more often. And only when we look back with, 2020 hindsight, do we see sort of revolutionary changes. But they take place one little step at a time, it seems, right? And I think that's very true with what we see with the mainframe evolution. We've seen steps where, the infrastructure, the hardware itself changed, right? Then the kinds of OS's applications that we could run on these mainframes, many times, as you say, in a hybrid environment, right? You started seeing that blend where you can do it hybrid. You can run kinds of apps that you wouldn't be able to run before. But what hasn't changed is dollar for dollar, penny for penny, the value that the mainframe platform delivers is hard, in terms of stability, scalability, security, uptime, all of these things. It's hard for anything to compare to that.
Well, yes, I've worked in the mainframe space for a number of years, but I started out on PC DOS. Okay. And, on doing stuff for DOS and then Windows and early Macs and things, and was always doing distributed things, but working with mainframe clients often. And what I think you could say is that the mainframe platform and its ability to support 6 nines, 7 nines of reliability. It's the most secure platform. It can handle heterogeneous workloads with heavy I/O, unlike any other platform. But we have to be honest that on the developer experience side, the system administrator experience side, it has lagged what was available in the distributed space. And so one of the things that I was very interested in doing and have been doing for a while now is trying to bring the advances from other platforms and make them relevant to the mainframe so that you can have a more unified experience from the outside. And then from a production workload point of view, if you require the quality of service of the mainframe, put it on the mainframe. If you don't, put it somewhere else. And, because we don't need to be bigots about the mainframe. There are some things that it's great for, and some things that, your mobile phone is great for, or a cloud platform is great for. So the key is to find the proper fit and integrate and learn. So I think there are things, many other platforms could learn from a quality of service perspective that the mainframe has been demonstrating for decades. But on the mainframe side, there's plenty to be learned about ease of use, integration, openness, and things of that nature.
Hayden, but maybe not you and I, but the generations, recent generations kind of want it all. They want their cake and eat it all. And I think one of the greatest innovation in mainframe is something you mentioned before, hybrid, right? And it's not just hybrid in terms of, let's say, mainframe and cloud, but it's mainframe to mobile as well, right? So you no longer live in a world where you got to choose, well, I'm going to do my whole thing on a mainframe, and so that's going to kind of stick me in this path, or I'm not, I'm going to do it on the cloud, so I forego my mainframe, or darn, the whole world's mobile and I got to do it mobile, so mainframe's out of the question. You can have your cake and eat your mainframe too today, right? You could have your mobile app back-ended into a mainframe with other parts of the application running somewhere in a cloud, right? And that's really the beauty.
I would say that is the norm for clients that have mainframes. And, you know, people don't know it. I've put up many statistics at, you know, speeches I've done in events and things like this, demonstrating that, you know, CICS, which is one of the transaction processing systems on the mainframe, runs 18 times more transactions than there are Google searches per second. It's running the world. However, far more banking transactions occur now via a mobile device, via a web browser, or via an ATM than occur when you go into the branch and see the teller. So that, and that's just one example, but I mean, because you can file insurance claims, you can obviously do e-commerce, all kinds of things from a mobile device, browser. And by definition, if the back end is on the mainframe, well, that mainframe app had to be opened up with APIs. And in the early days, there was, you know, just something specific to CICS, something specific to IMS. Then we went into the SOA world, and now it's RESTful services. But the key is that has been happening for a number of years. And when you do a banking transaction on your mobile phone, most likely it is hitting the mainframe on the back end. So it's been hybrid for a long time. What we need to do more now is opening up the tools that are used to build for and manage the mainframe, so that you can have integration at the tool level, so that the developer experience is no different from any other platform. And then you just deploy where you need the code to run because of quality of service requirements. But clearly, the mobile front end is not going to run on the mainframe. It's going to run on your iPhone or your Android device or something.
Absolutely. I want to jump into that tool discussion with you in a second, but I just feel like we're ignoring kind of the elephant here if we don't mention it, and this is as good a time as any. Obviously, you're at home. I'm here in the studio instead of around the world where I usually am doing conferences, and we know the reason why. Now more than ever, it seems that ability, like you talk about going to banking, who the heck has been in a bank in the last 3 months, right? I've gone to an ATM a few times wearing gloves to hit the buttons, you know, and, you know, but I do most of my banking on my phone. I'll transfer money here and there. Most of even running, you know, our little business here at devops.com, Media Ops, I think I've gotten 2 checks in the last 3 or 4 months. Everything is
and you still deposit it with your phone.
and I did. As a matter of fact, I did. So, I mean, thank God. Thank God for the internet and for mainframes and ubiquitous bandwidth and it. You know, even Zoom. Where would we be? I couldn't do this interview with you, right? As bad as this, you know, it has its own set of issues, granted, but at least these things are working and they're enabling us to live day to day, even during this, you know, worldwide catastrophe. So, you know, I think people need to recognize that they may not think about when they did that deposit on their phone, or they did an e-commerce transaction, or something, you know, healthcare related. God knows there's enough of that too going on. But there's a mainframe on that back end somewhere that's talking maybe to a cloud server and working on your phone that's enabling all that we don't even think about it. We don't even worry about it. It's just, it's a given. It's a done. It's rock solid. And you know, it's important in today's world. We have that stability.
It's certainly true. And, you know, the current pandemic is like I said, affecting people in new ways. It's a new pattern of living, and it's a new pattern for business. But sort of like the mobile pattern that occurred, that then put different stresses on bandwidth, but also compute, IO, this kind of stuff, because many banks, for example, experienced crazy surges at weird times that they'd never experienced before. But that's when people were on their phone on the subway or whatever it was, and they were doing something. Here, obviously, there's been an even more extreme need to interact with businesses and government agencies in an electronic manner. And so the backing systems better perform, better be scalable. We've seen some counterexamples. Thankfully, those weren't backed by mainframe systems where things just couldn't keep up. So, it's a new pattern, and we'll see. We are hearing that there's, if anything, an acceleration to digital transformation. We've been talking digital transformation for a long time, but it's become even more top of mind to the CIOs out there because of the current crisis that we're in.
Yeah. I mean, look, again, evolution versus revolution. Nature abhors a vacuum when, and when the need is there, we see technology, in this case it's technology, but we see change and adaptability, and it's evolutionary. Anyway, though, I don't want to dwell on it too much. Our audience knows all too well what's going on. In regard to that, let's talk about developer tools and management tools and some of the new stuff that Broadcom is bringing to the table. I know a lot of it revolves around an open source project that, again, you've been working with for years now called, I always mispronounce it. Is it Zoe or Zowie?
Zowie is the comic book.
Right. Well, no, I'm a David Bowie fan, right? And it's Ziggy. But anyway, it's Zoe. For our audience who maybe isn't familiar with Zoe, why don't we start there and then bring us right up, Kate, into what Broadcom is doing now with new tools and abilities here.
Okay. So Zoe is the first open source project focused on ZOS. Obviously, open source has been a thing for a number of years now, and there are plenty of open source tools that work on Linux on the mainframe. But as far as ZOS, which is the primary, operating system that's been there for a long time, evolved, of course, but is where the primary workloads are happening for CICS, IMS, DB2, MQ, that type of thing. This is the very first one. It was something done jointly between, CA at the time, now Broadcom, IBM, and Rocket Software. And the whole point is really to open up the mainframe for access from other platforms. So there's a command line interface that allows you just, on your Mac, your PC, whatever, enter some commands and it kicks off services. So of course, whatever it's going to do on the mainframe has to be fronted with RESTful services, be it ZOSMF activities or something that a tool provider like Broadcom or IBM or anyone else has exposed with RESTful services. But there's this command line interface. You can just kick it off from your PC, just like you would deploy something to a cloud platform using a command line. And because you have the command line ability, you can then, of course, tie things together into scripts so that you can now do automations. You can do your CI/CD pipelines. You can check on the status of jobs like you would, again, any other platform. And that's the goal. There's additional things and that was something we contributed, the command line interface. We also contributed something called the API mediation layer, which is just all about, open up a single port, do the authentication and auditing, then route to the appropriate service on the back end. Rocket contributed like an admin desktop, and IBM has contributed additional services on top of what comes with ZOSMF. So just you need to access a data set or whatever. So that was announced in August of 2018. So we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. And then but like I said, it's sort of enabling technology, because the important thing, the fact that you can get to a service on the mainframe is great. Now, what are all the services I can get to and do something interesting? And that's where a big focus of ours has been to open up APIs to the tools that developers, DBAs, system administrators use to get their job done. So now you can script things just like you would script them on other platforms. You're perfectly, somebody who's been a system admin for 35 years, they're probably comfortable with whatever green screen interface they've been using. Don't rock their boat. This is one thing I've learned. Don't go rip green screens out of people's hands. If they're comfortable with it, leave them alone. But the next gen developers, that's not what they expect. So allow them to have a programmatic way of scripting mainframe tools to do CI/CD pipelines, to do cross-enterprise, APM, to do security policy management across platforms. And if you can have common APIs to the distributed or mobile or cloud and mainframe tools that are handling this, all of a sudden you can have a more holistic approach to how you do things. So, that's very high level.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've done this for a large number of products, but we have almost 300 products that my teams support. Obviously, they're not all done, and we won't ever get them all done. But for the ones where we're making the biggest and primary investments is what we're promoting to our clients. Like we've done an integration between Git and Endeavor. Endeavor is the dominant source code management system on the mainframe. People want to keep using the green screen interface, great. Somebody wants to use a web interface, great. But most people, what are they using today? Git.
Yeah.
And so don't try to change how people work. So what we did is we integrated Git with Endeavor, and we do server-side synchronization between GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. But the developer experience is a Git developer experience. So you're giving people choice. You're making the mainframe, they don't have to know from the developer's perspective that, and this is going to be running on the mainframe. I can use the tools I'm used to. And to me, it's a little bit like faking them out, but it's like, don't make unnecessary differences. And you can do that if you open up the system with APIs that look like APIs from any other platform.
Hayden, we've had emulators and abstraction layers in technology forever and ever. And so I don't know if it's faking them out. I think it's giving people, it goes, what you said is dead on. You don't want people to have to learn a separate language, a separate tool, a separate interface, a whole different way of doing things because I'm going to develop on a mainframe now, right? That has been one of the, in my view, one of the big inhibitors to making the mainframe more appealing to the newer generation of developers. And so what you've seen over time is that people started creating Eclipse UIs for the IDEs, and the fact that you can do that for COBOL development or mainframe assembler, all right, we're giving you an Eclipse option. And then you're seeing web interfaces for admin type tools. But I think where we've evolved to, you used that word earlier, we're evolving all the time, but where we've evolved to is almost more minimalist, going back to just make APIs available, let people create the scripts. Maybe you deliver some sample scripts to show how to string things together. But now, when you've got a RESTful API, whether it's the mainframe on the back end or it's AWS or Azure on the back end, you don't know and you shouldn't really care in order to build or monitor or secure the system. So I think it's actually just making the mainframe be no different
than other places.
You know what, Hayden, I think the money line is whether it's Azure, AWS, or a mainframe on the back end, from a developer's point of view, they shouldn't really care, right? Use the best tool for the job.
And the person that should care are the people that are responsible for ensuring this application is up 24/7, 365, and this other one, if it gets, refreshed once a week and it's down for an hour and it doesn't matter, well, that probably doesn't need to be on the mainframe. So based on the characteristics that you require, put the workload where it belongs.
Absolutely. Hayden, I promise you this is going to take 20 minutes. We're at 25 minutes, and I apologize. But you know what? I haven't had you on in a long time. We haven't done an interview in a while. Let's come back soon. Tell us more.
Will do.
All right, man. In the meantime, you and your family stay safe. Thank you. All right. Hayden Lindsay, thank you. Hayden Lindsay, mainframe extraordinaire expert from Broadcom here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
You know, Matt Rose has been evangelizing AppSec for many, many years. And with the rise of DevSecOps, Matt found a very easy transition to becoming a principal evangelist for DevSecOps at Checkmarx, which has become one of the leading players in DevSecOps and application security around the world. Had a great chance to catch up with Matt at RSA conference of last year, and he also did a fantastic job presenting at TechStrong Con this past June. Here now is his presentation from TechStrong Con called Putting the Sec in DevSecOps.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Rose, Global Director of Strategy at Checkmarx. Thank you for joining. So today we're going to take a little deeper dive into the term DevSecOps. What does that mean from an application security standpoint? You're getting kind of overloaded with terms around security, from container security and Docker and Kubernetes and static analysis. So what are all these things? But really I want to kind of make a very specific point on application security technologies and how they fit in your DevOps cycle. I find it very interesting that a lot of times people say DevSecOps, but they mean many different things. So from an application security standpoint, we're going to be very specific on the technologies, the capabilities, and the best practices around implementing application security or software security technologies within your DevOps process. I like to keep these interactive, so I apologize that we're not live, but this is really a process that you need to think about when you're implementing application security technologies. So let's get started. So I'm not trying to insult anybody. Everybody's seen a slide like this before. DevOps is all about development, test, delivery, the intersection, the culture. But really, when you boil it down, there's really three, and more importantly, the fourth bullet item here, of processes, connections, and automation. But the tooling is what makes DevOps happen. From the core capabilities of a DevOps process, from your CI orchestration layer, your development environments, your source code management systems, your binary repositories, the tooling is what makes DevOps work. Well, that aspect of tooling needs to expand out into application security technologies, because application security needs to be baked in and part of the DevOps process for it to work effectively, especially in very, very effective and very fluid DevOps processes. So we're really going to dig into the tooling associated with AST, application security testing. That's what analysts call it, so I'll use that acronym a couple times. I always like to kind of define acronyms as we move through, because I've had experiences speaking to different development conferences or DevOps conferences, and I start saying acronyms that I'm assuming people know, but sometimes we need to have a definition. So I really try and work through the definitions, and you'll see that on a couple slides coming up. So as we move forward, the security technologies in DevOps, or application security technologies is a better term, I warned you I would do some definitions. So these are the core application security technologies associated with DevOps. I'm not going to read every single one because I know everybody can read slides and bullet points. I find it kind of boring for a presenter to read slides, but really hit on kind of the bleeding edge and evolving technologies associated with application security testing and the integrations and automations within your DevOps process. The key ones that are evolving are static analysis, scanning of the source code, where you no longer have to do full code scans every time because of the speed and agility of DevOps, so you can do incremental scanning. Dynamic application security testing, or DAST, typically used to happen late in the process, took a long time to crawl and go through an entire website. So we've kind of moved to a new platform, which is interactive application security testing, which basically leverages an existing process within your DevOps CD arena. So it's leveraging functional testing to find security vulnerabilities based on an existing process. And then another kind of evolution technology within application security is the runtime application self-protection, how it's actually a modernization of a more legacy kind of box on the wire of a web application firewall, and then a new concept for the open source analysis or software composition analysis. You're probably saying, great, Matt, I've seen these, I've heard of some of them. How do they work? You know, where does they fit within DevOps? And that's what we're going to talk about around the best practices as well. So the DevOps building blocks, again, this is totally separate from security, but the building blocks of a typical DevOps environment, again, there's many different flavors, many different processes that you follow, is development, CI, CD, and production. Many different technologies, tooling, and processes associated with building software that moves the package or the piece of software development from initial phases, adjustments, extensions, so on and so forth, all the way to production. But when you think about application security testing technologies, they slot themselves like this. So on the development side of the house, I know everybody likes to say shift left. I'm going to kind of clarify that in a second. But you have static analysis in the developer's native environment, their integrated development environment, or IDE, such as Eclipse, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, so on and so forth. It gives them the capability to be proactive in their native environment. When you move into the CI orchestration layer, that's where incremental SAST basically occurs. Incremental SAST is basically not doing a full scan every time. It's just rescanning the application based on the code changes that occurred during your kind of push-pull process from your source code management system. And this is a great place to also automate and integrate OSA, which open source analysis, but the common term people are using these days is SCA, software composition analysis. I like to kind of define those because being in the industry almost 16 years, SCA used to be mean to me source code analysis, and now we're reusing acronyms. So I just want to always make sure we're talking about the right thing. As we move into the CD arena, the continuous delivery deployment, I'll define those in a second. That's where you have IAST, the modernization of a DAST technology, and basically the testing of a running application. So we move from kind of the source code itself, the associated open source packages, the running application, and then in the production arena, that's where you'd have a physical device such as a web application firewall or a more modern baked-in technology, very similar to IaaS, but in the production arena of runtime application self-protection. So I'll just pause there and let everybody kind of digest the slide itself. I find it very helpful to kind of think about the technologies you're using now, where you're going in your process, and associated with best practices for application security testing tooling. Okay. So moving forward, one of the biggest things I hear when I talk about DevSecOps and different aspects of DevSecOps is people always say, oh, we're agile DevOps, or we're agile DevSecOps. When you think about agile, what are you actually referring to? Are you referring to agile, the software development methodology itself, which is really a noun, a thing? Or are you talking about the ability to be responsive to customer requests, to product or program management requests? Are you flexible to change? So when you think about agile, what are you really talking about? Are you talking about a structured methodology associated with the development of your software? Are you talking about flexibility to maybe outside variables that are constantly changing your equation? Because that really means two different things. You want to be able to pivot based on kind of driving factors, or do you have a structured methodology associated with the way you're developing software? So what is CI all about? CI I really refer to as the brains of a DevOps or a DevSecOps process. CI is a lot of times you hear CI orchestration, which I think is, I'll give a very silly, but I think really effective analogy, where CI orchestration, CI is the conductor of the orchestra. It basically puts the pieces of the 10,000 and sometimes 10 million piece jigsaw puzzle together. It basically pulls in the source code, the dependencies, the open source, the binaries, anything you need to put together for the application is done with CI. That's why it's a great place to integrate application security testing technologies such as static analysis or software composition analysis, because really implementing CI is as simple as using the right tooling for the task. And that tooling could be associated with building the software itself, running different types of tests, including application security tests. CD, what is CD about? Because that's the other block. We kind of know what development means, we kind of know what production means, but what is CD? Again, this is kind of a wordy slide. It's not a lot of interesting design features, but there's two bolded words within this specific slide. The key words are automates and continuous. When you basically roll out a DevOps program, there's no longer clearly defined blocks to do certain activities or testing. It's a living, breathing thing. It's constantly evolving, but the automation, first of all, the integration, the hooks in, the automation, the turning on of the hooks into the process, and then it's continuous. It's continuous and, more importantly, consistent, because it wouldn't be very effective if you're talking about a continuous process that is not consistent in nature. It's always building the software in the same way, because there's so many different aspects that could go wrong. But really, CD has two main kind of definitions, and it's all about the level of automation associated with the CD implementation. So continuous delivery to continuous deployment. Again, a lot of the application security testing technologies don't go all the way to the right on this. Again, I'm not a big proponent of left or right, because software is really just evolving at warp speed, and there's really no left, right, or middle. There's just the process. But continuous delivery is really automated all the way through from a standpoint, but the last step, the deployment to production, is a manual process where continuous deployment is automated all the way through. This is where you start to really deal with a lot of the industry buzzwords as, cloud native applications and Docker and containers and Kubernetes. All that is on the right side of the kind of release cycle in terms of automating CD. But we're really going to more talk about the capabilities on the middle to left side in integrating the application security testing technologies as they're being created. So again, a phrase that I hear a lot, just like Agile, is shift left. And everyone says, shift left, you need to start in the beginning of your development process. And I like to really kind of dig deeper into that, and I say, how many times when I'm talking to large customers or thought leadership type presentations, I like to query the audience, say, how many applications do you build from scratch today? This is no longer a waterfall structure, like we're going to build a new widget or a new app or a new piece of software. Typically, software development today is a extension, a copy, a branch of an existing code base. So really, there isn't a left or a right. There's just the process itself, and there's different kind of stages the software and its kind of evolution exists in throughout the stages. So you need different types of application security testing at every phase, because the thing you're testing is different itself. So you're going to get different results, and then you use correlation across the multiple kind of identified artifacts for remediation, which really is the goal. Again, this is a linear representation, code done to deployment. It looks like, okay, it doesn't circle back on itself. Well, this is really just a building block representation. If you go out and Google software development life cycles or a lot of processes, they're depicted as linear. Well, in today's day and age, linear is no longer really the proper definition or representation of the process. It's basically a living, breathing thing that is constantly evolving. And I have a slide coming up that kind of really communicates that. And here it is. So instead of it being linear, a left and a right, this is where you have to think about the process itself. I like to stand up or open the floor to a question when I'm presenting live to say, okay, we're talking about shift left. Based on this, this bow tie, this infinity loop representing DevOps, where is left? And people will be very boisterous, very vehement in kind of communicating that, oh, code is the first step. If an organization, and a typical organization, is releasing 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times a day based on different kind of implementations, thinking about, cloud native applications and microservices, something is happening in every one of these steps, or little green or purple arrows at all times. So how do you say this is the left or the right? It's just the process, because to be able to release, in that fluid of nature 100 times a day, 10 times a day even, something has to be happening at every time, and it's a constant feedback loop. So there really isn't a left or right, there's just the process itself. That's why you need to be cognizant of integrating and automating security technologies across the board. The kind of pieces on the outside here are representative of tooling. And this is not, again, security tooling, this is just the kind of foundation tooling associated with building software, from integrated development environments such as Visual Studio, Eclipse, IntelliJ, so on and so forth, your source code management systems, Subversion, TFS, Git, any of the Git brands, so on and so forth. Then you're moving into kind of the build environments, or the CI orchestration layer, that basically talks about Jenkins, TFS, Bamboo, TeamCity. But the one that's not really highlighted and has a lot of examples is, excuse me, is defect tracking, and that's represented here by Jira, kind of in the middle of your screen. The best way to circle the communication of the findings of any application security technology is through defect tracking, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel for security. I talk to a lot of senior executives in the application security space, or the C-level, CISO, CIO type level, and they tell me, Matt, I hate when we put security monikers on things. It makes people afraid. It's, DevOps. Oh, I understand DevOps. Okay, that's the process of building the software. Okay, DevSecOps. Whoa, that sounds really scary. Oh, what type of security are we talking about? So you don't need to reinvent the wheel to have the goal of a DevSecOps program associated with security be effective. Just go through the same processes, because you're driving remediation based on the findings from these automated integrated technologies, such as static analysis, open source analysis, software composition analysis, interactive application security testing. And I always like to communicate that, why do you have to have a security process, but you're very familiar and comfortable with a process for remediation of functional bugs or configuration bugs? So you really want to think about that, not really changing or being too complicated in terms of implementing security process, because again, it basically really insinuates an out-of-band or a different process related to security. So as we build out the technologies, that's where you have, different, these are checkmarks technologies around here on the outside, where they slot themselves specifically, from developer training to static analysis to software composition analysis. And that's really kind of a build-up or an extension of that first or second slide I showed in the deck, where the technologies slot themselves at the different disciplines of DevOps itself. So I'll just pause for people to kind of digest the slide itself. Great, we'll move forward then. So one of the things that I really like to talk to people about, and people come to me on, is like, Matt, we've integrated static analysis. We've integrated software composition analysis into our CI orchestration layer. If I find, and this is from a security kind of lens, an application security team type of lens, every time I find a security vulnerability, I want to break the build. I want to break the CI process. And I say, whoa, 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 let's not be the boy who cried wolf. Let's not be overly boisterous about breaking a process that really needs to stay running for the program to be effective. One of the things to think about is there's always risk, there's always vulnerabilities in your software. It's just a known fact. There's no such thing in my mind as a completely secure application. There's just a question of how much time in the day and available resources are to fix vulnerabilities. Think about it this way. So there's two variables when you think about security bugs or application security bugs: impact and likelihood. How bad is it? How potential is this to happen? And there's always a trade-off between the two. If it's really bad and really easy to execute, yeah, break the build. If I find a bug that is very, very disastrous to my company's reputation, the PII of my customers, and that's personal identifiable information, trade secrets, and it's really easy to exploit, yeah, let's break the build. But it's a little bit kind of inconsiderate of the process if you're breaking the build for every bug that's identified by any of the application security testing technologies I spoke about. There are different processes that you basically can implement that are just as effective, that allow the process to exist. You can flag or put tagging on certain builds associated with your CI orchestration that there is a security issue. You can mark a build as unstable, but really breaking the build, unless it is a very high impact, high likelihood type bug, you are going to be getting pushback from the DevOps architects, the development staff, so on and so forth. So, you know, swing a heavy bat, but only use it in very, very specific situations. So a little bit of humor to mix in here. I don't know how many people that have development experience. I was a software engineer for many years. When you broke the build, you were responsible to fix it, and all eyes were on you. So if you're the security professional, think about this. All eyes are going to be on you if you break the build for security. Sorry if there's some colorful language in here, but you know, always we're doing a lot of virtual conferences these days. I want to make sure that you know, there's a little humor, people get a little bit of a chuckle out of the presentation itself. So, okay, we've talked about integrating and automating technologies. We've talked about the different types of technologies. We've talked about where they slot within DevOps itself. The fuel for any application security testing technology within a DevSecOps arena is the security policy. It's the gas to the engine to the car. The policy is going to be, or the program is only going to be as effective as the policy itself. So I like to say that you start with a very concise and a very granular policy that really identifies the risk you're wanting to remediate, because the last thing you want to do is just create lists of artifacts or lists of potential security bugs, because you're going to overwhelm the process. It's going to make scan times longer. It's going to make potential defect tracking tickets longer in terms of the number in the lists. So start with the ones you can't live with in the application, and maybe flag one as this is going to break the build because this is something we can't live with, but really have a policy that is very clear and concise for new code findings, legacy code findings, and specifically in more of a topic that people don't think about as much, open source findings. And this policy has to evolve based on the threat landscape it's living in. I dealt with a lot of organizations that, you know, just basically blanketly accept OWASP Top 10 as the security policy for their web apps. Well, is that really effective? Maybe all 10 items aren't really applicable to your application. Maybe you should tweak it to basically focus the attention on 3 to 5. Or you basically use the framework of OWASP or SANS or CWE, and then intersperse the kind of knowledge you have about your application to make the policy effective. Because it's not an effective process to automate and integrate security testing technologies if the policy itself is just kind of all over the map. So think about that. Not only do you want to know where the proper insertion of the security technologies is within a DevOps process, you want to make sure that policy is going to find things you care about, because there's always a subjective conversation about, you know, is this a false positive? Is there potential for false negatives? If the policy is really looking for the things you care about, you're kind of removing one of the variables or action items associated with discussing whether this is a false positive or a true vulnerability. So we're kind of getting to the end here. You know, where does security clash with key DevOps requirements? speed is one of the big things. And that's why that first slide I kind of talked about modernization of existing technologies. Full code scans take too long, or full application scans take too long if we want to expand it out into another arena. So if you have to scan the entire source code base every time you want to do a security scan from a static analysis standpoint, it's going to be too cumbersome for DevOps. Yeah, sure, there is specific processes or build branches that you could actually do full code scans every time, but that's why the modernization of static analysis now has the capability associated with incremental, just the changes that happen. From a testing of a running application, DAS scans or dynamic application security testing scans, sometimes took hours, if not days, to complete based on the crawling capabilities of following every link and every potential path throughout the application, where you can actually modernize that with interactive application security testing that leverages the existing kind of process associated with your functional testing. And it basically leverages that existing functional testing program to provide you another stream of data without having to wait for it to complete, because you're already doing the functional testing. One of the big areas that you need to really think about too is application security technologies need to complement DevOps. It's a immediate kind of red flag or no to the process if you have to have special requirements or special configurations for security to take place as part of DevOps. Think about the DevOps architect. Oh, this is a security build, or this is a security branch. We have to do these other things. We have to build it in a special way. We have to add these additional dependencies. You just need to complement the process as it is, as simplistic as possible for it to be effective for not derailing that train that is DevOps going down the track, and it's not the local, it's the express. It's not stopping at all the little small towns from big city to big city, or initial code to a production environment. Stability, we talked about this. I had the memes with the colorful language. Build breaks need to be justifiable. You can't be overly boisterous, the boy who cried wolf. You can't be annoying to the process. Yes, there's going to be security risk, but carry a big bat, but only use it in very specific situations, because you don't want to be deemed annoying to the process or a barrier to the success of the process. So be very cognizant of breaking builds for security. I would, again, use other mechanisms such as tagging methodologies or marking builds as unstable based on security risks, so on and so forth. Again, application security technologies have to be part of the process, but they just have to be transparent to the process. All of a sudden, people see new defects show up through defect tracking systems. There's new metrics in the security dashboards for an organization. You don't want security to be the thing that's, the DevOps or the CI orchestration's kind of offline because of a security configuration issue with a application security technology. No, you want to be transparent to the process. So in summary, hopefully you guys got some interesting information today. Again, you don't have to agree with everything I say. This is just my kind of view. I've been in the industry a long time. I've seen a lot of ebbs, flows, changes in the industry. I've talked to a lot of people. This is just kind of my take on the best practices and some thought leadership on how to actually maybe approach a problem you're facing in your day-to-day activity for your job. But really, think about the process itself. Develop the policy or the gas that fits DevOps. One of the biggest mistakes people always do is buy the bleeding edge application security testing product and just turn everything on. You turn everything on, you're going to find a lot of stuff. I guarantee you. I first started working in static analysis in late 2005, early 2006, I think. And people wanted to say, is my application, when you scan it with static analysis, is it secure? Do I have any bugs? And yes, there's going to be some issues in here. It's just a question of whether you have the time and resources to fix everything, and that's where that variable of impact and likelihood come in. Is it bad? How easy is it to potentially find? The second one here is shift security everywhere. I read tons of things put out by vendors, by thought leaders, where they're like, oh, it allows you to shift left, shift left, shift left. There really isn't a left. Yes, early in the process, availability to security testing at all phases is important, And a lot of times, the code is the first phase, and then you have different potential phases as you move through the DevOps cycle. But there's different security technologies or application security technologies for each phase, from the development environment to the CI environment to the CD environment, even the production environment. And a lot of those specific components that are moving through the DevOps process are different. So you have different technologies to find different types of bugs, and then there's correlation capabilities between those different technologies. Interactive application security testing and static analysis, software composition and static analysis. That really allows you to be effective in the remediation process, because again, there's only so many resources available to you, and there's only so much time in the day to fix those vulnerabilities. And the last kind of bullet point before I wrap today is open source vulnerabilities are real. Most of the vulnerabilities you're hearing about in the press for major organizations have a component of open source risk, or vulnerability for that matter. Have a policy that not only whitelists and blacklists open source, scans the open source packages that are allowed for different vulnerabilities, potential inheritance of vulnerabilities from other open source packages, version type issues, licensing type issues. But then there's also the complement of, hey, there's open source packages in my code, but do I ever call that vulnerable function? Again, that's working smart, understanding if the vulnerability is applicable to me based on my use of that open source package. With that is all I have for today. Thank you for joining. Hopefully it was enjoyable. And again, you don't have to agree with everything I say. If you're pounding the desk and saying, Matt, I don't agree with anything, that's great. It was about thought-provoking concepts for a mature and effective DevSecOps program associated with application security technologies. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Today's news headlines from around the MediaOps site. We have, first of all, on DevOps.com, speed or quality in user experience. Survey shows surprising results. Look, if it's me, I want it all speed and quality, but read the article, they get the great survey results out there. Secondly, AI ops greasing the wheels of digital security amid COVID-19. I think a lot of people are using AI ops in more so than before in security. It's a good article. And then next is Google moves into confidential computing. Google's been making a lot of moves lately. There's some more articles coming on that as well. But do check those three out on DevOps.com. Over at Container Journal, we have how to use secure containers for cybersecurity. Very relevant. And then startup launches container scanning service. I'm not sure how unique that is at this point of the game, but check out the article. And then over on Security Boulevard, we have Schroeder's cryptocurrency, both private and not. A little play on the cat. But check that one out. And then how to prepare for a passwordless future. We've been preparing for that for some time. We'll see when it comes to pass. And then lastly, we have a report on most websites expose customer data. Unfortunately, probably more true than we'd like to believe. Anyway, that's the news for today, Tuesday, the 14th. And now it's time to head over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene has an interview with Ayesha Mazumdar of Optimizely, and then a preview of this week's webinars on MediaOps.com. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps, and I am so thrilled now to have this conversation with Ayesha Mazumdar. Did I get that right?
That's totally right, yep.
Oh, I'm so excited. You're a senior user experience engineer at Optimizely, correct?
Yes.
Awesome, right. Awesome. So thank you for taking a couple of minutes and talking with me. Really do appreciate it. I'm really interested in the topic of improving accessibility. we're talking like code level, improving accessibility. So, kind of getting the idea of getting the notion of accessibility and making applications more accessible to those who have issues with hearing impairment or other type of ADA, if you will, type of requirements, issues, however you want to say it. But I wonder if we can actually kind of start with you telling me a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of why this is a kind of a pet project for you, if you will.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I first learned about accessibility when I started working full-time at Salesforce. I was on the prototyping team then and realized within the first 2 or 3 weeks of starting full-time that I had never heard about the term accessibility after doing a 4-year computer science degree. And there was a whole team dedicated to it at Salesforce. And I was asked, did you check in with the accessibility team? And I just kind of gave a blank stare back, like, what team? What is accessibility? And so ever since then, when I realized, there are a myriad of ways that people interact with technology that are very different from what you and I might do on a day-to-day basis. And realizing that my curriculum hadn't taught me all the other different accommodations that I needed to make in order to make my applications or websites accessible for those people, I kind of grew a passion for introducing people to accessibility and inclusive design. And I work really hard in my day-to-day work to ensure that everything I'm creating is always accessible and is meeting the best current standards possible.
That's great. That's great. It really surprises me that, considering there is, all the requirements for the Americans with Disability Act, for physical infrastructure and, and other accommodations, if you will, and the fact that there are something on the order of like 18 million people in the U.S. alone that have some form of disability, it really, really surprises me that this is not more of an issue among companies. Why do you think that is? Is it just something that is just not thought about, or I don't know. What do you think?
I think part of it is that a lot of schooling curriculum doesn't account for it, which was, like I said, my experience. And so I think that kind of creates this ripple effect, if you will, that if you don't learn about it in school, then you don't think about it in your job. And if your leaders also didn't learn about it at any point in time, it's also generally a reflection that our teams aren't as diverse as they need to be, right? If we had people on our program management teams and design teams and engineering teams who used screen readers on a daily basis or made use of captions, right, and might have a hearing disability, then we would be thinking about that a lot more. So I think that anytime we see these companies kind of treating it as an afterthought is a signal that the teams themselves are not as diverse as they should be. Because for a lot of people, it's government businesses that have a requirement to meet the ADA, but other businesses do not. And so I think when you fall in that other category where it's not a hard requirement, it kind of falls off the table, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know that there are a number of larger organizations that actually have diversity and inclusion programs within their HR departments. I'm wondering if that is something perhaps that can be expanded to other areas of the company, including software development or application development, to really kind of keep the idea of diversity and inclusion as a fundamental in the development process. Are you seeing companies, maybe more companies, starting to think more about inclusion and diversity in application design and development?
I think it's getting there. I think for a long time there has been a very large push for diversity inclusion in terms of gender and ethnic backgrounds, but I think the part that has always been forgotten from those groups is disability, right? There's a myriad of different ways that we can be more diverse, and including people from the disability community is incredibly important. And I think especially with everyone working from home and all these conferences going virtual and mediums like this popping up, I think it's coming into people's forefronts a little bit more. People are realizing that, prior to this, a lot of people who needed some kind of accommodation to be able to work from home to do their job were told, you can't, right? We don't support remote work.
Right.
And now they're seeing other people in that same role being able to do the whole thing from home. And so I think people are kind of awakening to this realization that we could have been making these accommodations all along, and we could have set up a process to support this. And hopefully all of this, one upside to all of this new work style is that continues and we don't go back in time and, take a few steps backwards. Hopefully we're going forward from this point on.
Right. And
those people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, if there is a silver lining through all of this, maybe that's it. So I think also maybe a lot of the social issues that are happening right now are really putting the spotlight on diversity and inclusion, and hopefully, that circle will widen so that it does include people with disabilities. So, but companies that maybe haven't really thought so much about it, that maybe the light bulb is going off, if you will, and realize that they do need to start thinking more along those lines. How would they get started doing something like that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it can be kind of daunting to first take the step and admit, okay, we need to focus on this. We haven't been prioritizing this.
Right.
And then from there, I think part of it is, like we talked about earlier, bringing this up within your diversity and inclusion group as one step. I think having either someone internally who might already be very knowledgeable about accessibility, or bringing in someone from outside who can kind of do an accessibility 101 for your program managers and your designers and your engineers, essentially your entire product team. Having someone who can come in and kind of dispel any of the myths around what accessibility means. And, there's a misconception that it's a small percentage of people when it's really 1 billion people worldwide. I mean, that's not small by any count. And so I think that first step of just getting everyone on the same page of what does it mean to produce an accessible product is definitely like step 0. And I think that's already a huge effort, right? And education does take a lot of effort, but I think without everyone understanding why we need to be focusing on this and having that same passion for it, it makes every other change harder. And then I think from there, taking a look at, holistically your entire application and seeing, okay, where are we failing at this, right? Can you, step 1, can you pull up your application or your site, whatever it might be, and try not to touch your mouse and accomplish everything that you would be using if you could touch your mouse? If I use the tab key and move my focus around the screen, is it clear where my focus is at all times? That's something that you might think it's kind of an obvious thing that is included in websites, and it is in browsers, but as developers and designers, we actually do steps to take away that included functionality, not maliciously, right? But it's just a side effect of some of the stuff we do. And so I think taking some of those first steps to put yourself in the shoes of someone who might use just the keyboard or test it out with a screen reader, double check the color contrast. These are all little steps that we can start taking no matter what department you're in to make that progression towards an accessible product.
Okay. Yeah. So awareness is obviously the first step there, but I imagine that culture is a huge element as well in just kind of ingraining the idea of making applications accessible, or really any product accessible. Once you kind of foment this culture of inclusivity and heightening the awareness, if you will, of the need to not only recognize that applications need to be more accessible, but actually then start thinking about the ways to make them more accessible. I think that, probably can go a long way in a lot of organizations, and kind of help kind of turn that mindset, if you will, so that developers and designers actually just kind of start with that mindset, starting from the ground up. So, obviously that's going to have to start for new applications, from the beginning, from conception to planning to testing. But what about those applications that are out there now? I mean, are they going to have to start from scratch all over again, or are there ways that organizations can actually rework some of their existing applications to make them more accessible?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's what we're doing at Optimizely currently. There's a very established application, and a lot of it is not keyboard or screen reader accessible. And so that's part of my day-to-day job right now, is going in and kind of baking it in after the fact. It's by no means ideal, right? So if you are in the position to, like you said, think about it from the very, very beginning, that's where we want to be in the future for all new feature work. But it's definitely possible to go in and retroactively add it in. We focus a lot on our component library, because those components kind of fuel the entire application underneath. And so if we can go in and, let's say, improve the focus state of our inputs and buttons in the component library, then anytime those inputs and buttons are used in our application, we've already made a small accessibility improvement. And we can do the same for color contrast, making sure that our lightest gray text color still meets the contrast requirements against a white background. And if we make that change in the component library, again, we get that for free in our application. So there are definitely ways to go about it after the fact. I think it's just a matter of looking at your application and thinking, okay, what are the smaller pieces that get reused so often that if I make one change in that piece, it perpetuates throughout the entire application, and I get a lot of little accessibility wins, right? It's not going to fix everything overnight. Accessibility is definitely a process, and it's never done, right? It's constantly evolving. But at least these little baby steps that we can make by looking at some of the broader picture fixes, then I think that's progress.
That's cool. That's cool. We need to kind of bake accessibility into the whole DevOps process too, so that it becomes just another part of application design. So really interesting stuff. Aisha, thank you so much for kind of walking me through this. Really kind of opened my eyes a little bit toward, the issue that just seems to be still very pervasive in software design. And I would counter with, projects in general of all kinds. Yeah. So, So, all right. Well, thanks for having the conversation with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right, guys, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops with your Tuesday webinar preview. We got lots of great webinars happening this week, so please join us for as many as you can because we've got a ton of them, like I said. So the first one that we're going to be talking about is happening Wednesday, July 15th, 1 p.m. on devops.com, and it's called Making Security More Efficient for Developers. This is a timely webinar topic anytime. Arun Balakrishnan from Shift Left is going to discuss how companies can rethink their application security workflows for developers from the ground up. So if you're having any issues with your DevSecOps, or if you just want to implement DevSecOps or security into your AppSec workflow, please join us for that one. Our second webinar that I wanted to focus on today is, yes, you can apply NIST and ISO controls to unmanaged and IoT devices. Wow. This webinar is happening Thursday, July 16th at 1 p.m. on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by ARMIS, and the webinar takes a look at some of the risks associated with unmanaged and IoT devices, which obviously is a huge problem across the enterprise and in consumer devices. And it's also going to show an agentless approach to mapping the NIST frameworks to meet the requirements of cybersecurity frameworks for unmanaged endpoints and IoT devices. So definitely worth checking out. The third one I want to focus on today is happening Friday, July 17th at 11 a.m. This one is actually on Container Journal, which is very, very cool. This one is called Latency, the #1 metric for your cloud, and it's sponsored by StorePool. During the webinar, we've got Boyan Krasnov of StorePool Storage, who's going to compare the typical throughput benchmarking with latency benchmarking and demonstrate the impact of latency on user visible application performance metrics. So if you're dealing with user-facing apps, this is definitely the webinar for you, especially anything that has to do with customer experience and user experience apps. So lots to see in this webinar, definitely totally worth checking out. Again, that one is happening Friday, July 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Container Journal. Okay, those are the 3 webinars that I've got for you this time around. Please check in on Thursday for our next batch of webinar previews. And until then, happy viewing and thanks for joining, and please stay safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Great stuff today. Okay, now it's time for the Analyst Corner with Mitch, and we have 2 separate videos there. One is just a commentary from Mitchell about the panel presentation that follows. And by the way, the panel presentation is amazing. But really, both the panel presentation and Mitch's commentary talk about how important it is for leaders to experience followers' roles firsthand to understand how to lead product development in IT organizations. So Mitch first gives us his own commentary on it, and then he's a member of this panel that was led by Evelyn Orlick of ASG and DevOps Institute, and I think you're really going to like this one. Here now is Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley.
Good day. Welcome to Analyst Corner. Thanks for joining us. It's Mitch Ashley with Accelerated Strategies Group. We're going to do something a little different today, and I've said that on previous programs, but oftentimes this is me talking about some topical topic, something happening in the news, something related to our research, something just on top of mind for me. Today, we're going to take a little different approach, and we have a video coming up that I'll be on, but I'll be on as a participant. Now, you might have noticed that we've started to expand a little bit. Sanjay Sharma, Principal Analyst with Accelerated Strategies Group, has been on and doing his own Analyst Corner segments, which is fantastic. And that's really what this is. It's not a medium for just me to own. It's not the Mitch Ashley Show. It's Analyst Corner. And so we're going to have other folks that will be doing things on Analyst Corner as we continue to build out the kind of the knowledge and the value that we deliver through this, and hopefully some interesting and engaging content for you. Now, in this panel that's coming up, it's actually going to be on the topic of DevOps, and is there such a thing as a DevOps engineer, and how do you help organizations continue to grow in their DevOps journey, particularly around the talent and the skill of people. And Evelyn Orlick's going to be leading the discussion. Now, Evelyn comes from a career in as an analyst with Forrester. She's a very senior analyst and executive there. She's been out on her own for a little while, working with different groups, and she works with the Accelerated Strategies group. She also does some work with the DevOps Institute. She did a couple studies around the Skill Up portion. You may have seen some in recent webinars and information about the report. I definitely would recommend checking that out. So Evelyn's going to lead the panel today, or lead the discussion. And she's a fascinating, every time I talk with Evelyn, it just goes to a place I didn't expect, and something I take away like 7 or 8 things from that conversation that I either didn't know, hadn't thought about, expanded on what I was thinking about, maybe had a totally different perspective on it that disagreed with mine, whatever it might be. I just enjoy working with Evelyn a great deal. And on this panel, we're going to have some folks, Jeff Weber, who you might have seen in some other venues that I've been a part of. He comes from Robert Half. He's head of strategy there, so he's really interesting to talk with about that. Mark Settle is joining us, and Mark's someone that I had known previously, just recently introduced to him. He's like a 7-time CIO, and he's been a Silicon Valley CIO. He's written a couple of books. Very fascinating, and I hope to have him on some more with some other activities with us here on TechStrong TV and Analyst Corner. And then Tom Gogan, who is a senior executive product executive with Micro Focus. So he's in the thick of it. He's in the thick of building software, creating software, product and market, implementing DevOps. What are the practical lessons learned from that, especially when it comes to people? So, and that's what this interview, this segment, panel discussion is really all about, is a discussion. I'm come to the belief of a lot of the online activities that we see, webinars, conferences, and things like that. It's great to hear people speak. I enjoy that. It's great to hear presentations, but it's also really easy for some of those things to become formulaic. I know a lot of webinars is sort of the kind of rinse and repeat format of someone talks, someone presents, someone demos the product, and you do Q&A. And I try to mix that up when I do webinars and things like that. Sometimes even just going to a more conversational format. I think people really like the podcast style of conversation, and bringing that into a video setting, whether we call it a podcast or an interview or whatever it might be, tends to be a really kind of nice way to do it. I think it's different, a little more engaging than some of the other formats at times. There's a time and a place for everything. But back to the video today that we're going to see. One of the things that I'm a believer in is that as leaders continue to lead, we get farther and farther away of understanding the experience of what followers' experiences are. What's it mean to be a follower when you're involved in leading, maybe leading everything? I've certainly been guilty of that. Anytime I get involved in something, I end up leading it. Well, guess what? It's probably because I forced it to happen, or made it happen, or maybe had an opportunity for it to happen. But it's really easy I think, for myself, for leaders, to get so much distance from what your role is and how you view the world to what the experience is like for people that are part of the team, that are followers for that leader. And I've done some segments here with Carol Ross around the followers' needs, so I definitely would check that out. You can find that on digitalanarchist.com and the Analyst Corner segment, and look for Carol Ross. Super fascinating person. So I think it's important to find ways to re-engage with what that follower's experience is like, and learn from other leaders, not just yourself and the learnings that you have from you leading. So today's a great opportunity for me to do that. Evelyn's going to lead, and as I said, I learned things from her every time I talk with her, and this will be a great opportunity for me to experience her leading a panel discussion and learning some things from her as well as just a fascinating topic. So I hope you enjoy the video that we have up coming next, and I hope that this idea of find ways, if you're a leader, find ways to experience what followers experience. Try not to lead everything. Try to be a participant, a follower in some things once in a while. And maybe even on your own show, let somebody else lead once in a while. like we're doing here on Analyst Corner. So enjoyed the video segment.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hello, everybody. My name is Evelyn Ehrlich. I'm a research director doing research since many years around the topic of DevOps, digital transformation, and many 3 or 4 letter acronyms, I have to say. And I have to tell you, I'm with a fantastic gang of 4, I call them. Gentlemen I have known and met throughout my career, and I'm absolutely excited to have them here. They'll introduce themselves. Let me quickly set the stage for our conversation we're going to have for the next about 40 minutes or so. Everybody really at this point in time has heard of digital transformation. I don't think I need to explain that. The digital journey is has quite been accelerated, particularly due to the pandemic. There are many digital services which have showed up without us really wanting to have them done, but they needed to be done. And that's actually great news. Now with that, DevOps and the DevOps professional, the DevOps role, the DevOps movement, or the DevOps journey is one which plays a pretty significant role in that. And so what we wanted to do for the next 40 minutes is talk about the topic around what are some of the challenges on the skills relative to developing this DevOps team, the DevOps individual, the DevOps group, because we know there's a lot of challenges. I do know from research I've conducted that there are significant challenges relative to upskilling. We do know that about 48% from a survey we just recently did, 48% say they have no chance to find a skilled DevOps individual. And then 38% say once they found one, it's really hard to retain them. So that's kind of giving us the broad framework for our conversation. Gentlemen, I think might make sense to just introduce yourself. What do you do? Who are you? And then I'd love for you to share with us and with our audience what keeps you motivated in this time of our pandemic worldwide? What keeps you going? Because it is a challenge for all of us. So, Mitch, you're on the top left of my screen. Why don't you start?
Great. How about I'll start, and then I'll hand it off, pick somebody next.
That's great.
Okay, great. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. And we focus on the areas that you're talking about: digital transformation, DevOps, cloud native, cybersecurity, those areas. My background is I'm a repeat entrepreneur. I've also worked in large enterprise, started in IT as a developer, kind of moved up through the ranks. But I've been in IT as a CIO and head of IT organizations. I've also been a CTO of product organizations for SaaS online services, for security products. So I kind of worn both hats and been on both sides, which is what makes being in the analyst business a little bit more fascinating. In terms of keeping me up at night, I'm fascinated by not just change, but what is the change going to look like? And it's change means we're creating the future. And so I'm always constantly trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? Where is that going? What are other people seeing, learning, and doing? And how can I help other people in that process and get to whatever that new future looks like? So that's jazzing to me. So thank you. How about Tom? You want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So Tom Gogan, I'm the Chief Product Officer and head up the IT Ops Management Products Group at Micro Focus. Background, I've been with Micro Focus, previously HPE, for 4.5, 5 years now. Prior to that, I've done a succession of roles at places like Sun Microsystems, Apple, BlackBerry over the course of my career. So covered off on a lot of mostly building enterprise software products, delivering those to market. Yeah, what keeps me up at night, or what's the challenge? I always answer those questions. The most important thing for me is taking care of my family, especially at a time like this. Keeping things going, and the thing that keeps me up at night is, when are my teenage boys going back to school? So, looking forward to that time.
Great. How about Mark? You want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Mark Settle. I am a 7-time CIO, and I'm currently serving as an advisor to a variety of startup companies. I'm based here in the Bay Area. And what's really actually pretty exciting about the current environment is, many of these companies are doing extremely well. It's kind of counterintuitive, but many of the startups would tell you that they are more productive in the current environment than they were, pre-COVID. The commuting obligations that people had in the past have gone away for the time being. And simple metrics like the amount of code that's being generated and put into GitHub, and if you look at the efficiency of the funnel that's used to generate sales prospects and convert them into actually new customers, those maybe some companies failed completely. I mean, let's face it, some are not with us anymore. Some others maybe stumbled momentarily, but others, have really come back. I had a funny story. I was talking to somebody who, an IT leader that was meeting with their facilities manager, and they were trying to put together the plan to bring people back to the office. And then they said, well, people are more productive not coming in. So why are we trying to accelerate them to come back? What's the net gain of bringing them back here? And so I think, a lot of firms here are pushing that off to sometime after the first of the year. And there's no definite plan for a lot of companies today.
That's interesting. Great. Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Weber. I'm the executive director with Robert Half Technology. We help organizations around the world find resources they need for their technology projects and operations, kind of all skill levels, but a lot of software development and technology operations and support. But I have about more than 35 years of experience. Started as a developer in the 80s, and wrote code and did projects, database design, et cetera, back in that era. And then always thought I was going to become a CIO like my colleagues here, but never quite made it. I got the consulting bug and spent 20 years in consulting, doing everything from security to strategy and governance and operations. Through that process, I got connected with Gene Kim, doing some research on IT best practices and what made a good, what was the impact of good IT management, which eventually evolved into the DevOps. So I've been connected to DevOps as an operational model here for the last 10 years. So in my role with Robert Half, I help our teams figure out how to connect the right people to the right jobs. And, most of right now in COVID, the point of personal things, those kind of things, in my mind, I ebb and flow from, being, this is perfectly great working at home, to, I can't believe I'm in the same chair and the same desk for now 123 days. And I don't know that I'll ever leave. But, it's that idea of, we're talking a lot with our clients about when do they come back to work and how, right? It's easy for our technology people to be remote and do this work, even maybe more remote than ever, right? Can you fill a need with a resource in Florida for a project in Seattle? That would rarely have been done just 120 days ago, but it's happening more and more. So that idea of not only how to do the work, but then what type of work really matters, right? Are we really doing more DevOps, and what does it mean to people? And this whole concept of upskilling and training and resource modeling is something that, I think what Mitch said is this idea of anticipating and the change. It's an exciting time when you get past the problems of today, right? There's a lot of really cool stuff that I think we'll end up talking about here this morning in relation to that. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, very fantastic backgrounds. Thank you, gentlemen. So 42% of organizations are actually adopting DevOps at the project level. So that is one or many projects, right? And again, these are global enterprises. And then about 24% are adopting it at the enterprise level. That means at end-to-end, which is, wow, I have to say that's fantastic. And then 22% are planning, and this is 2020 numbers. So all of these almost adds to 100%. There's a few who say, we tried it, it failed. Or some said that they're never going to do it for whatever reason. They might have the reasons because it might not be for them. So posing a question, why is it so hard to find these DevOps people? What do you guys think? What do you hear? What are some of the comments you have heard in your travels, in your virtual meetings, in your conversations? Mark, do you want to, 7-time CIO, I'm sure you have lots of exposure to many of your kinds. Share what you have heard.
So there are many flavors of DevOps. You know, in IT, we love to have acronyms that don't really mean anything that can be used broadly to describe lots of different situations. And so there would be groups probably even that would claim that they're proficient in DevOps that other groups would look at and say, well, that's not even, you know, that's not really even DevOps at all. In fact, I think sometimes to the uninitiated, you know, the terms Agile and DevOps are used interchangeably. So if you're using Agile, then you say, well, you know, we're a DevOps team. And so these things come in many different flavors. So you have to be kind of suspicious, especially when people start responding to surveys, what they think they're doing. You know, this isn't like a certification that you get that says this group is definitely a class 1, you know, DevOps team. But having said that, to kind of cut to the core of why this is so difficult, you know, the terminology that I get exposed to, I don't know if I've ever seen a role, you know, job position that would be online like a DevOps engineer necessarily. I think it'd be more generic, like a software engineer of some type or a principal software engineer, et cetera. Although I'd be interested if other members of the panel have seen that kind of, you know, nomenclature used in terms of position descriptions. But more generic term that I've seen used, and I use all the time, is that of a full stack developer. And a full stack developer, the definition of that has really evolved over time. And you know, one of the core DevOps principles is that the team members and the team is about as self-sufficient as it possibly could be. And with the tools that we have today, you know, individuals can set up their own infrastructure, they can write their own code, they can debug their own code, they can release their own code, you know, and you know, the real purist would say that's sort of the end state that we all want to get to. Well, the problem is the number of tools that are out there have proliferated, you know, incredibly. And so to be able to master those tools, you know, and be adroit at, you know, using them in the proper way and not bumping into other developers, you know, et cetera, is a pretty sophisticated art form. And you don't see a lot of people that, you know, fully embrace or are able to do that whole thing. In fact, I think it's kind of ironic that a lot of DevOps teams have actually gone back to some degree of role specialization. So instead of everybody doing QA on the team, there'll be a couple people, they may code, but they really spend most of their time on the QA side. And then maybe another team member that's sort of the infrastructure person that makes sure that, you know, if they're spinning up or opening up environments, that those are getting turned off and, you know, costs are being managed appropriately, et cetera. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I really think the kind of skill set that you look for is this full stack developer, and you know, that can mean many different things depending on what the team is there to do. So I'll ask, let me ask Mitch maybe. I mean, Mitch, do you see the job term DevOps engineer show up as an actual job position that people are recruiting into?
Yeah, you know, Mark, I have occasionally, and usually what it's used for is sort of the narrow slice of DevOps of CI/CD, of someone that can come in and implement automated testing or continuous integration. That's because that's the starting point, or at least that's typically been, you know, automating testing has been a goal, and now that's sort of fundamental to DevOps, right? Is to automate everything as much as possible.
Right.
So, but beyond that, I think it's very confusing. You know, what's a DevOps engineer? And to your point, you talked about Agile. I think Agile is much better defined in terms of a common definition. but maybe it's because it's been around a little bit longer. DevOps is pretty loosely defined and an evolving thing. There's not one place to go to say, if you do these 5 things, you're a DevOps team or DevOps company. But I always ask myself the question of what's behind, why would you do that? Is it just sort of the next fad for IT? Is there really a benefit you're trying to achieve? And I think some of that confusion around DevOps also ties back to that. Is I always look at ultimately what's the business value we are trying to accomplish. Otherwise, who cares, right? If it's an IT metric, so what? I mean, maybe it's meaningful to IT, but why does it valuable to the business? So I think your point around being able to be a self-sufficient, et cetera, all lead to how do we get the right software out the quickest and give companies a competitive advantage through software. That's really what DevOps and Agile hopefully are there to ultimately deliver, at least in part. But that's I think why it's hard to find DevOps people, because it can mean a lot of things because everybody's a different place in their journey. If you're 5,000 person IT organization with huge investment in mainframe applications, but you're starting to venture into or maybe have some client, cloud native or containerized kind of applications, and this real mixed environment. How do you come together and create a DevOps strategy? That do you tie it all together? Does everybody work together? Do you do the same thing? Use the same tools? There's more questions than answers, I think, a lot of times. Not to make the problem unsolvable, but it's really kind of contextual dependent of each organization and what makes sense for them for where you are right now, and then where do we go from here, and how do we implement? How do we make that meaningful to us for DevOps? So kind of my long-winded answer, Mark. I don't know if that made any sense to you. But I'd love to hear from Jeff and Tom too. Your thoughts on
much of it in our world, and certainly in my world, kind of coming at it from a product development perspective, is more of a mindset. So we've driven agile transformation here at Micro Focus in the last few years, particularly in my product group. That mindset is around doing things over smaller things over shorter periods that eventually grow into big things. And it has the counterintuitive effect of driving actually up the predictability of outcomes. And I have this discussion with customers all the time. By moving and shifting to more of an agile mindset and agile delivery model, I can actually give you a lot more rigor around what my roadmap looks like, what the outcomes look like quarter over quarter, versus looking 18, 24 months over the horizon and trying to figure out where the developers will be then. And that resonates with customers. Also drives up our quality, right? So and part of the agile mindset is to do something and get it done, finish it off, make sure it works before you pass it on or move on to the next thing, or pass on that component to somebody else to work on. DevOps to me is kind of the same thing. It's a mindset shift. So you go from thinking of the world in terms of, say, IT or software development, and what you have to become as part of the product team. So you're no longer part of a cost center running a business system as much as you're part of the product team, looking for the ways in which to deliver the product to the market most cost effectively, that delivers on the SLAs that you put in place for your customers, those kind of expectations. And I think that speaks to the challenge of finding the right person for those types of roles. Just to your point, you look for a full stack developer. I mean, we ran into a huge problem when I was running a company in Ireland a few years ago. Huge problem, outages with our primary customer because of a scale issue. The problem itself manifested in a bunch of different ways on the front end. Explosive use of APIs that we had predicted wouldn't be used at all, this kind of thing, right? And as you dug through it, you had to get into Cassandra at the time, and it was just, but there were only 1 or 2, 3 people at the company who understood the full end-to-end implications of how the whole system operated. And so from a software perspective, the full stack, and then the hardware that it was sitting on, right? And could put that together. One of our interim solutions was to throw a bunch of flash memory at the problem, which did help with the problem. But as a developer, you wouldn't necessarily think that way. As a DevOps engineer, if you will, you're definitely looking at the full stack and the full system to figure out how to optimize across that. those are special people. They're very talented, and boy, oh boy, you want to hold on to them if you find one.
I would say there's a lot of, I agree with every comment there, but I would say there's a fair amount of job postings for DevOps engineers, but all the factors that you guys all talked about are why that's very difficult. I usually look at the DevOps engineer as the evangelist, or as the person in the organization that's helping to deploy DevOps, not necessarily the person that's the front end or full stack developer that's executing in a front end shop. Trying to get your clients and yourselves to figure those things out in the job world is a big deal. So all of that words, it made me sit there to think. In 1989, I took a job. I was a database engineer was my title. And one of the other guys was an engineer. And he's like, "You are not an engineer." And they changed my title to analyst, right? The point is, for 30 years, we've had this debate over titles and roles. So we could talk probably for the full 45 minutes on, is a DevOps developer and a front end, a full stack developer the same thing? We won't resolve that. I will say, though, that what I've seen over the 10 years or so of DevOps, it went from engineers and software.com type companies that could get their head around the core concepts and implement it without much legacy. They were a greenfield, if you will. They were able to go in. What we've seen now is this idea that these corporate entities, that for a enterprise, right, to go DevOps all in for everything in that corporate world, that their software and their customers are internal, right, more than they are external, et cetera. You know, now you're changing so much, right, and that adapting is what's causing a lot of that. And without a good definition, a consistent taxonomy, a lot of that's where they then start to struggle in the corporate politic. In my mind, it's clear the ability of DevOps and Agile, as we've said, to generate the ability to add business value faster in a more consistent and managed way is what it's all about. How do you go from cost to value? But we can all say that conceptually until we have to sit with the 500 people in our organization and the 12 different consulting firms that all have a different flavor of it in order to get to that same objective. And that's where the problems, start.
So I heard you say, I loved the contextual DevOps individual, or sometimes we call them the contextual DevOps human, right? To stay away from that loaded term of engineer, because Jeff, as you and I found out, we both are DBAs, and I was also a DBA analyst. I thought I was an engineer, but they downgraded me to an analyst. However, being an analyst for 15 years, I think that's not a bad title after all. So I heard you say contextual. I think that's great. I heard also, I loved the evangelist who actually takes on the mindset. I think, Tom, you said that, and Jeff, you said the same thing. So really trying to inspire the rest of the organization, because there is a significant culture change in how we do things, right, in that space. I heard about thinking of the whole thing as a product, really delivering that end-to-end perspective, but having empathy for all the different roles who are potentially part of that product team. So I want to leave that because I want to ask you for something else, which is near and dear to my heart, because I always get asked when I'm at events, what course should I take? What should I learn? What masterclass should I watch? What certification should I take? And there is a variety of different answers to that. So I'm curious. So Tom, when you guys hire, I'm sure you get into the conversations of that gentleman or that lady, the right person for our development of the next. I won't name the name of the product, but what do you look for? What are some of the skills you would say are absolutely must have?
Well, so a couple of questions in there, Evelyn, but we when we're looking at hiring folks and looking at skill set, really what I'm looking for is again, I come back to the mindset, the attitude towards things, right? So I want to see somebody who's really curious, right? We're looking for people who have a curiosity, a sense of interest in in a variety of things, right? Rather than someone kind of getting locked into one specific area. And so as I'm looking at skill sets, I'm looking at people to hire, for example, in different roles. I'm really interested in people who are curious, who are interested in diving into something, who can bring a different set of perspectives to whatever challenge it is that we're going to throw at them. When you come into even a role like mine, coming from the outside in allows you to bring sort of new, fresh perspectives and challenge the central beliefs of the teams. We made a transition to cloud native, bet on Kubernetes 4 or 5 years ago. Part of it, I mean, my CTO recommended going that way, and I had been doing some consulting with a startup before joining HPE, and they were all over it. I could see where developers were going, and it was a no-brainer. So bring that fresh perspective in, know that it's the right way to go, make the step and go. So when we're hiring, I like to see people that are curious, they're really interested in what we're trying to do. They don't necessarily have to have the background in IT ops management. I think you can learn that as you go, but you really need to have a curiosity and a willingness to just kind of roll up your sleeves, get in and do the work.
Cool. Other thoughts? Jeff, what do you see?
Well, I think it's an interesting, and I think I hear what Tom said there a lot, right? What we want is curious. We want people that can adapt. We want thinkers. Yet what we train to are languages and tools and environments, right? And so to that individual that's trying to figure that out, they get a certification in something, right? It doesn't mean they're creative and or thinkers and take on new things, right? And I think that's one of the real issues is we still need the skills. We expect the ability to know the languages and the tool sets, right? Those kind of things. And there is this practical experience that you can do over time. So we're sort of caught in all of that because it does take time. And if the process in your organization is still changing quite readily, and it's in itself adaptable, a lot of the core skill sets, you have to rethink how they apply in that new process. And if I'm a consultant and I go from organization to organization, I might place a person in DevOps at company A and they go to DevOps at company B, and all of a sudden they can't be functional, right? And that's a real challenge. So I think it's this idea, we don't really know how to consistently define it. I'll go back to my story of the analyst, Evelyn, that you brought up, but we had these debates years and years ago. People wanted to only know, COBOL, and they only wanted to work in a mainframe. They didn't want to go to client server, and they were trying to decide how to build and evolve their career. And sometimes they had a long career in one thing and never did change, right? In today's world, that change is happening at a much different rate. It isn't every 3 to 5 years. It's every 3 to 6 months type thing. So I think there's a lot of complexity to the individual person trying to figure out how to evolve those careers. And I think we, to the broader technology community, can just work on continuing to refine that, continuing to give some structure to it, which is evolving and which is, I think, happening, which is needed for the corporate to really change.
Well, there's kind of an analogy here to the field of architecture. Like if you go to a major university and get a degree in architecture, they don't have classes in mechanical drawing. I mean, you got to go pick that up on your own someplace along the way. And I think the same is true in our profession. But you need to have some innate curiosity about how these tools work, and really kind of enjoy. It's almost a sense of personal satisfaction for the really good programmers. They love the challenge of mastering a new tool or a new language. And it's just one other reflection. It's interesting. In the old days, I don't know what that would be, maybe 10 years ago, we'll all remember the QA function was typically the first stage of a developer's career. Somebody would come out of school or have minimal experience. We'd put them on a QA team, and they'd start to see what software looks like, and there'd be bugs, and they get to fix maybe some of the more innocuous things, et cetera. And then once you got that level of familiarity, you'd kind of move up and become a junior coder or whatever the terminology would be, and then move through more levels of responsibility. But when you wrap it all together and you have like a DevOps person, there's no QA role by itself in a lot of organizations. You've got to come in and be able to do 12 other things at the same time. So it's more challenging, but by the offset of that is that people do get exposed to these tools a lot earlier, typically in their careers.
But I think you bring up a great point of how do we create a career path for individuals, right? Because the people that are running the shops are people like us that had a model that was a career path that isn't necessarily the same anymore. And so those individuals, we see it today, even a lot of people are trying to reskill because of COVID. You have a lot of people that are taking whatever that time is. We have a lot of organizations trying to help minorities and other type of groups get skills that they can then go be employed. But you need the entry level. You need the process by which to do that. And I think we're going to have to be thoughtful in what that looks like, and not just say, hey, you should be a DevOps engineer or you should be a whatever, because that probably isn't a nice path for that person that doesn't come with if you have a lot of these, data scientists or DevOps engineers, they're engineers or analysts today, with master's degrees in math, and they get taught things and they're innately curious and investigative, et cetera. And the challenge is now you're taking them to have that framework, and you want to make them teach them JavaScript and hope they can then go work in a development role in a DevOps shop. So those are some real challenges that are even more today than they were just a little bit ago.
I think part of what we're talking about, Evelyn, is this change from just like careers aren't a linear path anymore, right? Just like software is not a linear path anymore. I think we work in an environment where going to the curiousness that you talked about, Tom, it's this innate ability to learn and have a thirst for learning. And the higher, the more they're going to sort of step up in their career, take on the next thing, figure that out. So that's something that I look for. It's get away from the checkbox of do you have skill A, B, C, and D. Actually, I might need one of those. Like right now, I need to make sure you have that. The rest of it, you'll either learn or it'll change. In 2 years, we're going to be looking for that plus something else. So I hope I'm never going to find somebody that has all the stuff that I want for the role that I'm trying to put them into. So can they learn it? Do they have a past history of demonstrating, especially if they've done it on their own initiative in some way? I've learned it at home. I learned it through, being part of meetups. I learned it through these community groups that I'm part of as a developer. That's, I think, the world that software has evolved to. Not everybody does that. We didn't do that earlier like everybody does today. But I find this interesting because in other domains, I'm working with people that come right out of school, master's degree or undergrad, and I'm shocked at how comfortable and how fearless they are with using tools. It's like, oh, I can learn that. I'll go figure that out. I did this is sort of a little bit of a tangent, but we did a focus group one time, and we were trying to figure out home services that we might offer. And some guy said that, yeah, I poured my patio myself. I'm like, you poured your own cement? How did you do that? How did you figure out you could do that yourself? I watched the YouTube video and it was 3 minutes. So I figured if it could be explained in 3 minutes, I could do it myself. And that's, I don't believe in career paths anymore. I believe in helping, coaching people achieve the next thing of where they want to go in their journey. Everybody has an individual journey. I don't think there's a career path for DevOps people. I think it's everyone's own path. And our role is to help people figure out how do you achieve what you want to do now, and can we match that with where the organization is and needs, or how do we create an opportunity? Or if it's not here, they're probably not going to be here 3 years from now. How can I help you get to the next thing and get the next person in, right? So anyway, I think it's a much more fluid environment than certainly what I was used to when I started my career.
I agree. That's very inspirational, Mitch. The challenge lies that there is many leaders. Just if I look at here, sitting in Germany and the companies around me, very traditional enterprises where their leadership is not necessarily of the same mind. When I, for example, shared with them the word holacracy, I think that's how it's said, which is exactly the model which says, whatever I'm passionate about, whatever I think I can do, I go and do because I own my own career. If I want to be a DBA in whatever, MongoDB, or if I want to be an AI person or a EX or whatever, I take that and I go for that. Unfortunately, there is that clash between the traditional, right, the traditional way of how, as Jeff used described, we lay out this career plan. There is vendors and communities who have certifications. We still have to get a master's. I have two daughters who are struggling, one in architecture, Mark, the other one in psychology, who say, Mom, what am I supposed to do now? I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? You got the degree, I paid for it, do something. But they are used to that thought that some there is that path, right? There is that. When I started at Hewlett Packard, I started as a programmer with a master's as a programmer because that was the career path. And so any ideas on how do we, I mean, besides saying we're the leaders, you guys are the leaders you're hiring, but it's only 4 of you. How can we spread that gospel besides this conversation we're having? So if you're listening in, this is the gospel. Be aware of that you need to change that mind. But how can CIOs do that in a way without or leaders without upsetting the entire company and HR and the CEO and the revenue and everything else? Any tips?
Well, I think part of it for me is get to know the people on your team. Those are the most, you're going to impact them directly. And so I can give you an example. A woman on my team was running my business ops. She's an absolute rock star. And she was getting bored, frankly, after many years of this. And so the discussion centered around, well, I've got, a few projects like this I want to get going. One of them was really around what we call now doc ops, leading into what are we doing, from a DevOps perspective, but really driving doc ops and getting to a modern self-help approach to our product documentation, our product support, that sort of thing. And she just stepped right into it and took it on with gusto, right? And it allowed her to kind of carve out something new and interesting to do on her journey. She's done it so well. Of course, we promoted her and all of that, right? But it's getting to know the people that you work with, the teams that you work with, and then encouraging that same model to be passed on down through the organization. Look, we're in a unique time, right, where the people working for us know more about their jobs than we'll ever know about them. Mm-hmm. And so you really are depending upon, the folks around you to drive, and it's more important now than ever, I think, for leadership to set a vision, set a direction, and then work with your team to drive to that vision in that direction, right? And you do that with your team now. You get the buy-in, you build it, you work it, and then you drive to it. But you're depending on people who are far more experts in these various areas that you depend on to actually be successful to do it. So I think you get to know your people, you get to know the environment, but then, as I said, very important to be able to set a vision and a direction, put the right incentives in place, and then help people follow the pet journey that they want to follow to get there.
So
I would agree with Tom there. And from the IT perspective, all of that's true, right? I guess I would have always said, as an IT person, we're always pushing the string up a little bit as an IT to the business owner, right? To that, what is that business person that's wanting value? They looked at us as cost, right? So you guys can, whatever you need to do, Tom, you guys do it. But you can't spend more, you can't have more, et cetera. What's happening though, and it's been happening over the last 5 to 10 years, is this concept of IT as a driver of value and a driver of growth, not a manager of value and a manager of growth. I think COVID has done nothing but accelerate that transformation, right? I mean, and so it's been happening. Cloud is not a new thing, but cloud even more is accelerating. Digital, if it's not bolted down, it's going digital. And a lot of those things would have been done except for funding and or buy-in and or, industries that use it regulatory as an excuse for not doing that. All of those excuses are now past, right? And to be honest, we'll probably do 5 years of transformation in the next 2 years or 1 year. right? Which is, so I think we may get what we hope for, but not then be prepared for what it is that's expected of us, right? Because we're still playing the games of we've used 20 different tools and we don't have a defined set of skills and we don't have a strategy, those kind of things. So those are real problems for us to deliver, but I think the business is now going to expect us to do that.
I heard you say servant leadership, I think, is, Tom, what
Yes.
I think you discussed. I love that.
Yeah.
I remember doing some research at Forrester at the time. And Jeff, to your point, I wanted to share a story I just discussed with a gentleman who has a very large IT organization in New York City. Of course, in 4 weeks ago or so, within a matter of days, they had to transform their entire organization to move outside into their home offices because of the pandemic. And he was saying things which didn't happen before, the kind of collaboration, the kind of empathy, the listening, the servant leadership, all of those, soft skills, or sometimes I call them human skills or core skills, were there in their people, but they never really had that time to express because they were so enthralled with the latest tool of whatever DevOps platform they are going to buy or they're going to exchange or whatever else. And so in that crisis mode, they shifted into this backup mode of really connecting and really understanding who they are, which almost brought me to tears because he said in 2 days, all of them were in their back office, in their home offices, and they were just heroes. And so that made me think of what you were saying, Jeff, that we finally, as IT folks, we're no longer technologists per se, we're actually business partners and business technology enabling and helping. So that was great. Any other thoughts on what we just talked about? We have a few more minutes. We can maybe 2 more minutes. Any other thoughts? Mitch, you look like you have a thought. I can see that.
Do. No, I think the point around the acceleration of this, that Jeff, you're bringing up, and Tom, and you talked about, Evelyn, is what I've heard is how, when we have to make a decision, we can make one. Like, what collaboration tool are we going to use? How are we going to do our remote meetings? All of a sudden, when you have to make a decision, got to get something done. That sense of urgency can bring people together and get things done. And I think that's one of the shockers to the folks outside of IT is how come we've been debating what collaboration tool, Slack or Teams, for the last year, but we suddenly in a week can have it implemented. How do I get that to happen every week, right? So because we need to operate at that pace. So I think there's some introspection that's worth, yes, it's because we're forced up against the wall. We got to do something quick. Let's go get it done. But what did you do in that situation? You might be able to bring back to kind of regular everyday life. The other thing to add into is organizations are definitely accelerating their digital projects, their transformative projects. And one of the reasons is when things get disrupted, when the cards kind of get thrown up in the air. You remember that game 52 card pickup? We kind of throw them all on the floor and then the other person realizes the joke and they got to pick them up. That's kind of what the rules get rewritten, and supply chains have been broken. They're not going to be reassembled the same way, but they're also going to be driven by different kinds of strategies. Cisco and the housing crisis of 2008, for example, chose to, rather than having specialists and having 3 or 4 that do a certain kind of products, they wanted a handful of manufacturers that could do any number of projects around their optical equipment or whatever type of equipment. So they've got a lot more flexibility in their strategy for supply chain. I think that's how we need to think about software. It isn't that we want people to be fungible and just kind of they're here, gone, whatever. It is about, it's a people business, and it's all about the EQ, right, of how we work with people. They themselves are going to be moving in and out. We don't have 10, 20, 30-year careers at companies anymore. That's how folks expect to live. And I think that's how they're going to continue to live. So I think we can, instead of saying, well, why doesn't it work the way we want it to? Let's take the way people want to work and adapt that to how we need to get things done. And that's where hopefully there's some magic sauce that we can make happen.
Magic sauce is good. Before I turn it over to you, Mark, because I know you have a thought, for all of you, I would like to end with all of you saying one word, just one word, which is near and dear to our conversation. So while Mitch, Tom, and Jeff get to think about it, Mark, you always have quickly a word, but anything to what Mitch just said, and then we'll go to the one word and we'll wave goodbye. Oh, I now know why people are waving. Sorry, Mark. People are waving because when you leave a meeting, you kind of get up, physical meeting, you get up, you kind of grab your stuff into, and you kind of slowly walk out, and people are seeing that you're leaving. Well, in a Zoom or in a digital virtual meeting like that, it's like Mitch pushes the button and we're done, which is why we're all waving, because that means we're kind of saying goodbye. That's research-based. All right, Mark, any last thoughts? And then we'll go to the last word, and then we'll wave goodbye.
Okay. So one thought came up when Mitch was talking. I think one of the things we've all learned is how resilient and adaptable our teams are. I mean, it's a really kind of remarkable how people have soldiered through and done things and delivered things, completed things that are beyond what normal expectations would be. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, maybe we need more drama in the workplace. Maybe we need to create these incredible feats of unbelievable challenge. That people
chaos monkey.
And if you think about it, that's what happens with a lot of the startups. So the startups, maybe you've got initial customer that wants to see a certain feature added to the product. Maybe you're coming up on a funding round. Maybe your VCs are looking for you to be able to show a 100% increase in sales relative to a prior quarter or a year ago. And so the gun's kind of always at your head, and you celebrate these accomplishments as you go along. And, I just think in larger companies where things move a little more lethargically, maybe people need to get a little more creative about introducing drama into the workplace, which is something, you wouldn't normally hear prescribed, but it seems to have had a very, very positive effect in our current situation. So with that, I'll yield to the word round.
Now you get to think, let's start with you, Mitch. What's your one word? Remember, I say one. The focus is on the one.
I always go back to everything happens with people. It's always about people. We like to think it's other things. Nothing happens without people. So how do we help our people succeed? So that to me is the word I go back to.
People. Good one. Tom, you got one? You can pass to Jeff if you don't have one. But
no, it's okay. I like because part of the theme of this has been people, process, tools, which we talk about. So I appreciate what Mitch is saying. So I actually, the word I like right now is inflection, or two words, inflection point. I think we're living through one of the most exciting times of our lives. And I got to live through the whole, internet coming alive in the 90s, and I happened to be at Sun then, and it was an incredibly exciting time. Right now, what we're going through, I mean, our developers, we track them, like you guys were saying, we track them worldwide. They haven't lost their velocity. In fact, they're doing better. And in many ways, when you survey them, their quality of living has gone way up. Okay, and frankly, we've got folks, working out of home offices they've crafted in their garages, but their quality of life is going up. The intimacy that we have with our colleagues today, you're all sitting in my home office, right, is higher than it's ever been, despite the fact that we're not really face to face. I think this is a major inflection point in terms of how we live and the quality of our lives going forward. And we'll come out of this. I mean, we're already looking at optimizing property, all of this sort of thing, because I like working this way. It seems a lot of people like to work this way, and it seems we're every bit as productive as we were. So this is, to me, a really, really interesting point in history, actually.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
We use a word, the leader of who I report to, she often talks about, having pride in what we've done and where we're going. I think I can tie it to a lot of the inflection, being curious, right? But, the ability to do all the things that have happened and set yourself up to be thoughtful going forward. I think we should take a moment to, as organizations and individuals, be proud of what we've accomplished and, use that as motivation for what we can then do, going forward.
Beautiful. All right, Mark.
So I'm gonna close this out with the word opportunity. And there are many different kinds of opportunities that have presented themselves because of this current situation. I have a good friend here in the Bay Area who's a CMO. He's working from home and he has 2 girls. I think they might be in junior high or something like that. So they have family lunches every day. He said, I would have never had lunch with my kids. That's like an unheard of, and they actually talk, at lunch. So it's not the end of the day when everybody's exhausted and has activities to go participate in. So, from a parenting point of view, there's some opportunities. From a skills development point of view, we've talked about this, and the skills are never static. People should be exploring that. Then at a business level, I think there are some smart people out there, and this kind of an situation we're in, they're looking around at adjacent spaces or competitors. I mean, don't think that Hilton's not looking at what Marriott's doing on their website or scraping prices off of Sky Blue's commuter, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So people are, the smart people that have the resources will find this to be, you look 2 or 3 years from now and there'll be some people that'll point back at this and say, we could have never gotten to where we are today if we hadn't used that as an opportunity.
Excellent. Fantastic. I have one too. Mine is just empathy, which I think is very much infiltrated through what you guys said. Gentlemen, this has been really, really good. I'm an honor to share the screen with you, I should say. Thank you very, very much. I hope we will screen again together at some point. Have wonderful days. Journey to your kitchen for the cup of coffee or in the garden for a glass of cocktail this evening, which is what I'm going to have because it's 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to talk to all of you. Learned a bunch.
Join top experts and peers for a Splunk virtual event, DevOps Open Source Insights and Innovations. Open source powers the world, drives innovation in technology and in practice, and reduces the proliferation of products that just don't work together. In the arena of DevOps, open source tools and standards enable problems to get solved. Come take a look at some of the ways Splunk solves problems with open source and how we are contributing to open source solutions to make your work life better. Register today.
Excellent panel there with Mitchell, Evelyn, and the rest. Hope you've enjoyed it. You know what, folks? That's going to call a wrap on today's TechStrong TV. We hope you had a great time. We are back with a fresh new show on Thursday. Tomorrow will be a replay of one of our 70 or 65 something episodes previously. And we'll be back Thursday with more. Until then, though, this is Alan Schemmel. Be safe, be well, be strong. TechStrong.